Take your hand off him, right now." Lieutenant Nathan Cole's voice wasn't loud, but it dropped the whole ballroom into silence. He had one hand flat against the chest of a man worth $4 billion, a tech mogul, who'd just shoved the groom and called him a charity case in a rented tux. Nathan hadn't come to this wedding to start a fight. He'd come in his dress white Navy uniform to toast an old friend and drive straight home to his 6-year-old daughter. But some things a man does not let slide. What Nathan didn't know was that across the room, the loneliest billionaire in America had just watched every second of it and was already walking toward him. Before we begin, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if you still believe love and honor mean something in this world, follow along and subscribe because it only gets better from here. Nathan Cole almost turned the car around 3 times on the drive into Seattle. The first time was at the county line when his hands started sweating on the wheel and the rented tux collar felt like it was trying to strangle him. The second time was on the interstate when a song came on the radio that his wife used to hum, and he had to grip the wheel until his knuckles went white to keep from remembering. The third time was in the parking garage of the Fairmont, when he sat in that borrowed sedan for a full 4 minutes, staring at the concrete wall, telling himself he could still text Ryan and say Olivia had a fever. But he didn't turn around. He never did. That was the thing about Nathan Cole. He showed up. "You promised," he muttered to himself, checking the mirror one last time. "You promised the man." He'd been Ryan Foster's best man once before, back when they were both 24 and stupid, and certain they'd live forever. That wedding hadn't lasted. Ryan's first marriage burned down in 18 months while they were both deployed. So when Ryan called 6 weeks ago, voice cracking, saying he'd finally found the real thing, and he wanted Nathan standing beside him again, there was no version of the universe where Nathan said no. He straightened the white jacket. 2 ribbons. Not many. He'd earned more, but he never wore the ones that came from the worst days. He looked at himself for one hard second, saw a 35-year-old man with tired eyes and a jaw that hadn't smiled in a while, and he thought about his little girl back home with the neighbor. "One toast," he said to the mirror. "One dance if Ryan makes you, then home." He had no idea how wrong he was about the dance. The ballroom was the kind of place Nathan had only ever seen in movies. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars. 100 round tables draped in white. An orchestra, an actual orchestra, not a DJ tuning up in the corner. And people. God, the people. Nathan had walked into firefights that made him less nervous than this room full of people who smelled like money. He found Ryan near the head table, and for a second, the whole knot in his chest loosened. "There he is." Ryan grabbed him in a bear hug, pounding his back. "There's my best man. You clean up okay, Cole? For a squid." "You cry yet?" Nathan asked. "Twice. Might do it again." Ryan pulled back and his eyes were shining. "Nathan, I mean it. Thank you for coming. I know you don't do this stuff. The crowds, I'd have swum here," Nathan said simply. And he meant it, and Ryan knew he meant it, and both men had to look away for a second, so neither of them lost it right there by the shrimp tower. "How's the munchkin?" Ryan asked, clearing his throat. "How's Olivia?" 6 going on 40. Lost a tooth Tuesday. Charged the tooth fairy a late fee because I forgot the night before? Ryan laughed so hard he had to lean on the table. "She's yours all right." That was when the man appeared. He came out of nowhere the way men like that always do, like the room owed him space. Silver suit, silver watch, a face that had never once been told no. He clapped Ryan on the shoulder hard enough to make the groom stumble, and his voice carried across 3 tables whether he wanted it to or not. "Foster, there you are. Big day for a kid from Tacoma." "Huh? Bet you never thought you'd afford a room like this. Who's paying for all this anyway?" "The bride's daddy." Ryan's smile went stiff. "Good to see you, Marcus." "I mean it as a compliment," Marcus said, waving a glass. "Guy like you ends up in a place like this. It's the American dream. Charity case in a rented tux, and here you are." He laughed at his own joke. Nobody else did. "Where'd you even find a bride? She know what your credit score is." The color drained out of Ryan's face, and Nathan watched his oldest friend, a man who had pulled two sailors out of a flooding compartment and never told a soul about it, shrink. Just shrink right there in front of him on the best day of his life. Nathan didn't decide to move. His body decided for him. "You'll apologize." The words came out quiet, and that was what made people turn. Loud men were background noise in a room like this. A quiet one was a threat. Marcus turned, blinking like he was noticing Nathan for the first time. He looked at the white uniform, and something ugly crossed his face. "And who are you?" "The help's got a soldier now." "Sailor," Nathan corrected. "And I'm the best man. This is my friend. On his wedding day. You're going to apologize to him, and then you're going to walk away." "Or what?" Marcus stepped closer, chest out, that $4 billion smirk in place. "You gonna do something, G.I. Joe? You know who I am. I don't care who you are." Nathan's voice never rose. It just got flatter, calmer, the way it did when everything else in the world got loud. "I've stood in front of men a lot scarier than you. You put your hands on him and called him a charity case in front of his own wedding. Now you're going to say you're sorry, or I promise you this is a story people tell about you for the rest of your life. Your choice. But you're going to make it in the next 5 seconds." The room had gone dead silent. Somewhere the orchestra stopped tuning. And for a moment, one long humming moment, nobody breathed. Marcus looked at Nathan's eyes. Really looked. And whatever he saw there, whatever it was, it drained the smirk right off his face. He forced a laugh that didn't work. "It was a joke." "It wasn't funny. Say it to him." Marcus turned to Ryan, jaw tight. "Congratulations, Foster. Sorry, it was a joke." And then he set his glass down and walked away fast, and the whole room let out a breath at the same time, and the orchestra started up again like nothing had happened. Ryan gripped Nathan's arm. "You didn't have to." "Yeah, I did," Nathan said. His hands were shaking a little now that it was over. They always did after. "Nobody talks to you like that. Not today. Not ever. That's Marcus Vale. Nathan, that guy could make a lot of trouble. Then he can make it with me." Nathan finally let himself breathe. "Go find your wife. It's your wedding. Go be happy. That's an order." Ryan hugged him again, harder this time, and went. And Nathan stood there alone by the edge of the dance floor, heart still hammering, wishing more than anything that he was home on the couch with a sleeping 6-year-old and a bad movie. He did not notice the woman across the room who had watched the entire thing. But she had noticed him. Victoria Ashford had built one of the largest defense technology companies in America. She had negotiated with foreign governments before breakfast. She had walked into rooms of men twice her age and left with their signatures and their respect. At 32, she was on the cover of magazines that called her the future and the most powerful woman in the Pacific Northwest. And she was the loneliest person in that ballroom, and she had been for years. She stood near the balcony doors with a glass of wine she wasn't drinking, watching the wedding the way you'd watch a movie about somebody else's life. She'd been invited because she'd funded the venture the groom worked for a small favor, a name on a list. She hadn't planned to stay. She never planned to stay anywhere. She'd learned young that if she lingered too long, people started asking. And people always asked. The tall one in the silver suit had been circling her all night. Marcus Vale. He'd cornered her twice, once about a merger, once about dinner, both times with the same greedy shine in his eyes, the one she'd learned to recognize before she learned to drive. Every man who came near her had that shine. She had stopped being surprised by it around age 25. She'd simply stopped believing there was any other kind. And then she'd watched Marcus Vale walk across the room, and she'd watched him humiliate the groom, and she'd braced for what always happened next, for everyone to laugh nervously and let it go, because Marcus Vale had $4 billion, and $4 billion meant you got to say whatever you wanted. Except one man hadn't let it go. She'd seen him from the moment she walked in, if she was honest. The Navy officer standing alone by the balcony, the only man in the room not working an angle. He hadn't looked at her once. Not once. In a ballroom where every head turned when she passed, This one man had glanced at her, registered her the way you register a lamp, and gone back to nursing his club soda and looking at the door like he wanted to leave. She hadn't known what to make of that. Now she knew exactly what to make of it. She'd watched him step in front of his friend. She'd watched him face down a man worth $4 billion without so much as raising his voice. She'd watched the whole room hold its breath, and she'd watched Marcus Vail, who had once made Victoria's own board of directors, sweat crumble like wet paper in front of a man in a rented-looking uniform with 2 ribbons on his chest. And when it was over, and everyone went back to their champagne, she watched that same man exhale and rub the back of his neck and look more than anything like he wanted to go home. Victoria set her wine down. The woman beside her, an assistant, a handler, someone whose job it was to move Victoria toward useful people, leaned in. "Ms. Ashford, Senator Hadley just arrived if you'd like me to." "No," Victoria said. "There's also—" "No." Victoria was already moving. "Give me a minute." "Where are you?" But Victoria Ashford, who had never in her adult life walked toward a man first, was already crossing the floor. Nathan felt her before he saw her. It was a skill you picked up overseas, the sense of someone closing distance on you, the shift in the air. He turned, half expecting Marcus Vail coming back with friends already squaring his shoulders. Instead, there was a woman. And Nathan's first unguarded thought was that she was the kind of beautiful that made you forget your own name for a second. Dark hair, a green gown. Eyes that seemed to be measuring him and hoping for something at the same time. His second thought, coming fast behind it, was that this had to be a mistake. Women like this did not cross rooms for men like him. "That was quite a thing you did," she said. Nathan blinked. "Ma'am? Marcus. What you did. Nobody does that." She tilted her head. "Do you know who he is?" "I've been told." Nathan glanced toward where Ryan was now dancing with his bride, and his shoulders eased a little. "Doesn't much matter to me who a man is. Matters how he acts." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper than surprise. "That's a rare thing to believe." "It's the only thing worth believing." He said it plainly, no performance in it. Then, because his mother had raised him right, he added, "Nathan Cole, ma'am." "Victoria." She left off the last name, on purpose. She wanted to see how long it lasted, a conversation where he didn't know. "You came for the groom. Best man? Second time. First marriage didn't take, but this one's the real thing." Nathan's face softened when he talked about Ryan. "Known him 14 years. He's the best man I know. Guy like Marcus Vail isn't fit to shine his shoes $4 billion or 40. Victoria studied him. There was no angle here. She kept waiting for it, the pivot, the pause where a man realized who she probably was and started performing. It didn't come. He wasn't performing at all. He was just tired and honest, and clearly counting the minutes until he could leave. Which was, she realized with a strange ache in her chest, the most interesting thing that had happened to her in years. The orchestra shifted into something slow. Victoria heard the words come out of her own mouth before she'd decided to say them. 4 words she had never once said to anyone. "Would you dance with me?" Nathan went very still. Across the ballroom he could feel it, heads were turning. He could see in his peripheral vision that people had noticed her, now noticed who she was standing with, and a low murmur was starting to move through the crowd, like wind through grass. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I think you've maybe got me confused with somebody important." "I don't confuse people," Victoria said. "I read them for a living. Dance with me, Nathan Cole." He should have said no. He knew he should have said no. He was going to say no. He had a daughter at home and a long drive and a life that had no room in it for whatever this was. Instead, his mother's voice was in his head again. "You don't leave a lady's hand hanging," and he found himself setting down his glass and taking her hand, and the two of them walked out onto the floor, while half the wealthiest people in Seattle watched a billionaire lead a Navy single dad into a waltz. "I'm going to warn you," Nathan said, as he took her waist, careful and respectful, a good 6 inches of daylight between them. I haven't danced since my high school prom, and I stepped on that poor girl the whole night." "I'll survive," Victoria said. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she almost smiled for real. They danced. He was better than he'd claimed, not smooth, but steady, sure-footed, the way a man is when he's spent his life learning to keep his balance on a moving deck. And he did the strangest thing, the thing that would replay in Victoria's mind for weeks afterward. He talked to her like she was a person. "So how do you know Ryan?" he asked. "You a friend of the bride's? Business, sort of. I helped fund the company he works for." She waited for the follow-up. "What company? How much? What are you worth?" It didn't come. "That's good of you," Nathan said. "Ryan works hard, deserves a break." "You're not going to ask me about the company." "Should I?" He looked genuinely puzzled. "It's a wedding. You want to talk about work at a wedding?" Victoria laughed, an actual surprised, undignified laugh that turned two nearby heads. "No," she admitted. "No, I really don't." "Then we won't." Nathan turned them slowly. "Tell me something real instead. What's the best thing that happened to you this week?" And Victoria, who spent her days in rooms where every word was a strategy, found she didn't have an answer. Not a real one. Not one that wasn't a deal or a stock price or a headline. The silence stretched. "That's a hard question," she said finally, quietly. "Yeah." Nathan looked at her, and there was no pity in it, just curiosity. "What did you do this week?" "I closed a very large contract, fired an executive who deserved it, flew to 2 cities. She heard how it sounded. Those aren't the best thing that happened. Those are just things that happened." Nathan nodded slowly, like she'd said something that made sense to him. "You want to know the best thing that happened to me this week? Tell me. Tuesday night my daughter lost her first tooth." His whole face changed when he said it. Years fell off him. 6 years old. She was so proud. Wiggled the thing for a month. And she looks up at me, gap in her smile, and she says, "Daddy, does this mean I'm a big kid now?" And I told her yes, and she thought about it real serious for a second, and then she asked if big kids still got bedtime stories. His voice caught just slightly. I told her big kids get bedtime stories forever. Victoria didn't say anything. She couldn't. There was a lump in her throat the size of a fist, and she didn't fully understand why. "That's the best thing that happened to me this week," Nathan said. "A gap in a smile and a bedtime story. Beats any contract I ever heard of." "You raise her alone?" Victoria asked softly. Something passed over Nathan's face, and he was quiet for a moment. 6 years. Her mother left while I was deployed. Came home to a note and a baby with a neighbor. He said it flat, no self-pity, a fact reported. Best thing that ever happened to me, and the worst thing same year. But Olivia, that little girl, is the reason I get up. I'd have swum home from the other side of the world for her. "I believe you," Victoria said. And she did. She who believed almost no one believed this man completely. "She's lucky." "No," Nathan said. "I'm the lucky one. People get that backwards." They turned again slow, and Victoria realized her cheek was very close to his shoulder now, closer than it had been, and she hadn't decided to move there, and she didn't move away. "What about you?" Nathan asked. "You got kids? Somebody at home?" The question was so ordinary, so human, and it hit Victoria harder than any hostile takeover ever had. "No," she said. "Nobody at home. Family close by. My father passed. My mother and I don't—" She stopped. She never talked about this. She never talked about any of this to anyone ever. "We're not close." "That's a lonely way to live," Nathan said. Not as a judgment, as a simple, kind observation, the kind you make to a fellow human being who's hurting. "Yes," Victoria said, and her voice cracked on the single word, and she was horrified at herself, and she could not stop it. "Yes, it is." Nathan felt her hand tighten in his. And this man who had faced down a $4 billion bully without a flicker of fear, this man softened completely. "Hey," he said gently. "Hey, it's okay. Long as the music's playing, you're not lonely. That's the deal with the dance. Nobody's lonely in the middle of a song. Victoria closed her eyes. And she let herself, for the length of one waltz, just be a woman being held by a good man with no angle and no price and nothing owed. She had not felt this in so long that at first she didn't recognize it. It took her a moment to name it. Safe. She felt safe. The music was slowing now, winding toward its end, and Victoria knew that when it stopped, this would be over. He would thank her polite as anything, and go home to his daughter, and she would go back to being who she was, and this one impossible song would be a thing that had happened once and never again. She couldn't let it end without him knowing, so she leaned in closer, until her lips were near his ear, and she said the thing that had been building in her chest since she watched him refuse to let a rich man crush a poor one. "Can I tell you something?" she whispered. "Something true." "Course," Nathan murmured. "You're the first man in years," Victoria breathed, "who's looked at me instead of my money." Nathan froze. He stopped dancing entirely right there in the middle of the floor, and he pulled back just enough to look at her face. And she watched it happen, watched the pieces come together behind his eyes. The gown, the way the room had reacted, the way people had murmured her name. Marcus Vale's smirk, Ryan's warning. Victoria. Just Victoria. No last name because she'd wanted for once for one single dance to be no one important at all. "You're—" Nathan started and stopped. "Ashford," she said quietly. "Victoria Ashford." And Nathan knew the name. Of course he knew the name. Everyone in the defense world knew the name. He'd stood on ships that ran on Ashford systems. He'd trained with Ashford equipment. He had, without ever knowing it, trusted his life more than once to technology built by the woman standing in his arms. The blood drained from his face. "Ma'am, He stepped back another inch, suddenly too aware of his rented tux, and his 2 ribbons, and his beat-up sedan in the parking garage, and his 6-year-old at home with a neighbor. "I had no idea. I've been talking your ear off about tooth fairies. I'm sorry I—" "Don't." Victoria caught his hand before he could pull it all the way back. Her eyes were bright and fierce, and God help her wet. "Don't do that. Don't you dare do that. Do you have any idea?" Her voice shook. "Do you have any idea how long I've waited for someone to talk to me about tooth fairies?" Nathan stared at her. "Every man in this room," Victoria went on low and fast, the words spilling out of her now, "every man in this room saw me walk in and did the math. Every single one. What am I worth? What can they get? What I can do for them? And you—" She laughed, and it was half a sob. "You looked at me like I was a lamp, Nathan Cole. You wanted to go home. You'd rather be on a couch with your little girl than in a ballroom with the wealthiest woman in the Pacific Northwest, and you had no idea that's what I was, and it didn't matter, because you'd have wanted to go home anyway. Ma'am. Stop calling me ma'am. I don't—" Nathan shook his head, overwhelmed. "I don't know how to talk to somebody like you. I don't know the rules. I'm just a guy. I fix things, and I raise a kid, and I do my 20, and I go home. That's it. That's the whole story. There's nothing here for somebody like you." "That," Victoria said, "is exactly why there's everything here." The song ended. The last note hung in the air, and the floor around them began to fill with applause for the band, for the couple, for the night, and neither Nathan nor Victoria moved. They stood in the middle of 100 wealthy strangers, hands still joined, looking at each other like 2 people who had just found something they weren't looking for and didn't know how to hold. "I have to go," Nathan said finally. His voice was rough. "My daughter, the neighbor, the drive. I can't, Victoria. I can't do this. Whatever this is, my life is small. On purpose. It's small on purpose. There's no room in it for—" He gestured helplessly at all of her, the gown and the fame and the weight of who she was. "For any of this." Victoria nodded slowly. She understood. She, of all people, understood a person who kept their life carefully walled off to survive. But she didn't let go of his hand. "I know," she said. "I know you have to go. Go home to Olivia. Read her the bedtime story." She swallowed. But answer me one thing before you do. One thing, and then I'll never bother you again." "What?" Nathan said, barely above a whisper. "For the length of that song," Victoria said. "Were you lonely?" Nathan opened his mouth to say something polite, some deflection, some way out of the room and back to the safe, small life he'd built with his own 2 hands. And he found he couldn't lie to her, not to this face, not after what she'd just given him. "No," he admitted, and the word came out cracked and honest and terrified. "No, I wasn't." Victoria's breath caught. "Neither was I," she whispered. For a long moment they just stood there. The Navy officer who'd spent 6 years believing love had left his life for good, and the billionaire who'd spent her whole life believing it had never been meant for her at all. 2 people who had walled themselves off so completely they'd forgotten there was anything on the other side of the wall. Then Nathan gently, carefully let go of her hand, because he had to, because Olivia was waiting. "It was an honor to dance with you," he said. And then, because he couldn't help it, because 6 years of holding the line finally wavered for 1 second. "You're not what I expected, any of it." "Neither are you," Victoria said. "You have no idea." Nathan gave her a small nod, the kind he'd give a superior officer, the kind that meant more than a handshake. And then he turned and walked toward the door, back straight, uniform crisp, a good man going home to his little girl the way good men do. Victoria watched him the entire way. She watched him say goodbye to Ryan. She watched Ryan glance at her over Nathan's shoulder with wide, stunned eyes. She watched Nathan shake his head at whatever his friend said. No, don't make it a thing. It was just a dance, and she watched him disappear through the ballroom doors and out of her life. And Victoria Ashford, the most powerful woman in the Pacific Northwest, stood alone in the middle of a wedding in a green gown that cost more than that man made in a month, and felt something she had not felt in more years than she could count. She felt the loss of him. She'd known him for one song, one dance. And already the room felt colder for his leaving it. Her assistant appeared at her elbow, breathless. "Ms. Ashford, Senator Hadley's been asking for you, and Mr. Vale wanted to apologize for earlier, and there's his name," Victoria said, not taking her eyes off the door. "I'm sorry. The officer, the one I danced with, Lieutenant Nathan Cole." Victoria finally turned, and there was something new burning behind her eyes, something her assistant had never seen there before in 3 years of standing at this woman's side. "I want to know everything about him, where he's stationed, where he lives, everything, and I want it by morning." "Ms. Ashford, is this a business matter?" Victoria looked back at the doors he'd walked through. Out in the parking garage, she knew a tired man in a rented tux was climbing into a beat-up sedan to drive hours through the dark, back to a sleeping child and a small, careful life he'd built to keep the pain out. He'd told her there was no room in that life for someone like her. Victoria had spent her entire career being told there was no room. She had never once let that stop her. "No," she said softly. "No, it isn't business." She picked up her wine, finally took a sip, and for the first time all night, she smiled. Not the practiced smile from the magazine covers, but a small, private, dangerous smile that belonged to no one but herself. It's the first thing in years that isn't. Neither of them knew it yet. Not the tired father driving home through the dark with a Navy officer's straight back and a heart he thought he'd sealed shut for good. Not the lonely billionaire standing in a ballroom watching a door and planning her next move, like it was the most important deal of her life. Neither of them knew that one dance, one single song between 2 people who'd both given up on being seen, had just quietly, completely, and forever changed the entire course of both their lives. The file arrived on Victoria's desk at 6:40 the next morning, and she read it 3 times before her coffee got cold. Lieutenant Nathan Cole, 35, 14 years in the Navy, 2 combat deployments she wasn't cleared to read the details of, though the redacted lines told her enough. A commendation for pulling men out of a compartment that was filling with water, and then threaded through all of it, the small human facts that her people had dug up almost as an afterthought, a modest house 2 hours south near the base. A daughter, Olivia, age 6, enrolled in Mrs. Petrovsky's first-grade class. A wife who had filed nothing, taken nothing, and simply vanished 5.5 years ago, leaving the two of them behind. Victoria set the file down and stared out the window at the gray Seattle morning. Her assistant Diane hovered in the doorway. "Ms. Ashford, your 9 o'clock is... Move it." "To when?" "I don't know, just move it." Victoria picked up the file again. "Diane, when you gathered this, did anyone contact him?" "No, ma'am, just public records and the wedding guest list." "Good." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Get me his number." Diane hesitated. In 3 years she had learned to read every register of her employer's voice, and this one was new. "Ms. Ashford, may I ask what this is regarding? If it's a recruitment matter or a contract." "It isn't." "Then forgive me. What do I tell people it is?" Victoria looked at her, and something in her face made Diane stop asking. "Tell them nothing, because it's nobody's business but mine." "Name?" Nathan almost didn't answer the unknown number. He was standing in the cereal aisle of the Piggly Wiggly, with Olivia hanging off the cart like a monkey, and his phone buzzed against his hip with a Seattle area code he didn't recognize. "Daddy, the marshmallow one," Olivia was saying. "The marshmallow one, the marshmallow one." "We got the marshmallow one last time. You picked the raisins out and left the whole box." "That was a mistake I made when I was young." "You were young last Tuesday. I've grown a lot." His phone was still buzzing. Nathan sighed and answered it, tucking it against his shoulder while he steered the cart one-handed. "Cole?" "Nathan." A pause. "It's Victoria." He nearly ran the cart into a pyramid of canned peaches. "Victoria Ashford," she added when he didn't say anything. "From the wedding. The dance." "I know which Victoria," Nathan said. His voice had gone strange. Olivia looked up at him, sensing the shift the way kids do. "How'd you get this number?" There was a beat of silence. "I have people who are very good at their jobs." That's not really an answer. "No," Victoria admitted. "It isn't. I'm sorry. I realize how that sounds. I could tell you I got it from Ryan, but I didn't, and I'm not going to start this by lying to you." "Start what?" Nathan pulled the cart over to the side of the aisle away from the other shoppers. "Ma'am, last night was, I don't know what last night was, but I meant what I said. My life's not built for whatever a phone call from Victoria Ashford is. It's just a phone call, Nathan. That's all it is. A person calling to say she couldn't stop thinking about a conversation." Nathan closed his eyes. Olivia tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, who is it?" He put a hand gently on her head. "I'm at the grocery store," he said, "with my daughter. This isn't..." "Then I'll be quick." Victoria's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it he recognized because he heard it in his own voice sometimes late at night. "You asked me a question last night, on the dance floor. You asked me what the best thing that happened to me that week was, and I didn't have an answer." "Do you remember?" "I remember. I've been thinking about it since. I couldn't sleep for thinking about it. And I realized..." She stopped. "I realized I couldn't remember the last time anyone asked me a question that wasn't about what I could do for them. That's all. I just wanted to say thank you for asking me a real question." A short, self-conscious laugh. "That's the whole call. That's it. I'll let you get back to your daughter." Nathan stood there in the cereal aisle. Olivia had given up on him and was reading the back of a cereal box, sounding out the words. He looked down at her, the gap in her smile, the cowlick he could never get to lie flat, and then he looked at the phone in his hand, and something in his careful, walled-off chest cracked open just a little. "The marshmallow one," he heard himself say. "I'm sorry. My daughter wants the marshmallow cereal. She picks the marshmallows out and leaves the rest, and I let her every time, because she's 6, and I can't help it." He didn't know why he was telling her this. "That's the best thing that happened to me this week since you're keeping score. Standing in a grocery store losing an argument to a 6-year-old about cereal." Victoria was quiet, and then softly, That sounds like the best thing that could happen to anyone. Yeah, Nathan said. It kind of is. There was a silence on the line, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people, neither of whom wanted to hang up. Can I call you again? Victoria asked finally. Not about anything. Just can I call you? Nathan looked at his daughter. He thought about the small, careful life he'd built brick by brick to keep the pain out. He thought about how tired he was of how safe it was. Yeah, he said. You can call me. They talked for 6 weeks before either of them called it anything. Victoria learned his schedule without meaning to. She learned that he was up at 500, that Olivia had to be at school by 8, that he had duty some nights and training some weeks, and that when he was gone, the neighbor Mrs. Alvarez watched Olivia and made her eat vegetables that Nathan couldn't. She learned that Nathan called his daughter Munchkin and Bug, and when she was in trouble, Olivia Grace Cole, in a voice that made even Victoria sit up straighter over the phone. And Nathan learned Victoria in pieces, the way you learn a person who spent a lifetime not letting anyone learn her. You never talk about your mother, he said one night. It was late. Olivia was asleep. He was on the back porch with the phone and a beer he'd been nursing for an hour. There's nothing to talk about. That's not true. There's always something. That's how you know it matters when a person says there's nothing to talk about. Victoria was quiet for a long time. She sold the company my father built, after he died. She sold it to the man who'd been trying to buy it for a decade for less than it was worth because she didn't want the trouble of running it. And I was 19 and I couldn't stop her, and I swore I would build one bigger. So I did. A pause. I built one 10 times bigger, and I never once thought about whether I wanted it. I just wanted to win. And I did win. I won everything. And here I am 32 years old calling a Navy officer from an empty apartment at 11 at night because he's the only person alive who talks to me like I'm a human being. Nathan didn't say anything for a moment. He just let it sit the way you do when someone finally tells you the true thing under all the other things. That's a lot of winning to be that lonely, he said gently. Yes, Victoria said. It is. You want to know what I think? Always. I think you built the company to win a fight with a ghost, your dad's. And I think somewhere in there, you forgot you were allowed to build a life too. Those are different things. A life and a win. People mix them up. There was a long silence on the line. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was thick. How do you do that? Do what? See straight through me. Nobody sees through me. It's the one thing I've always been able to count on. And you do it like it's nothing. Nathan smiled in the dark. Comes from raising a 6-year-old. Kids can't lie for beans and they can't stand it when you lie either. You spend enough years being that honest with a little person, you kind of lose the knack for anything else. The video calls started by accident. Olivia had a science project, a volcano, the eternal volcano, baking soda and vinegar and red food coloring, and Nathan was on the phone with Victoria, trying to talk through what he'd bought while simultaneously failing to keep his daughter from eating the modeling clay. Just hang on, Olivia, that's not food. Victoria, hang on. Let me just... And out of frustration more than anything, he'd hit the video button, and suddenly there was Victoria Ashford's face on his cracked phone screen, and behind Nathan, Olivia's voice rang out bright and unafraid. Who's that? Nathan froze. He hadn't planned this. He turned the phone, and there was his daughter hair in 2 crooked pigtails. He'd done himself a smear of red food coloring on her cheek, staring frankly at the beautiful stranger on the screen. This is my friend Victoria, Nathan said carefully. Hi, Olivia said. We're making a volcano. It's not working. Daddy did the baking soda wrong. I did not do the baking soda wrong. You did it a little wrong. On the screen, Victoria laughed, the real laugh, the undignified one, the one almost no one had ever heard. Can I see it? And that was how Victoria Ashford, who negotiated with defense ministers and moved billions of dollars with a nod, came to spend a Tuesday evening on video watching a 6-year-old's baking soda volcano fail 4 times in a row, offering increasingly ridiculous scientific theories. Until finally, on the 5th try, It erupted in a fizzing red mess all over the kitchen table, and Olivia shrieked with joy, and Nathan laughed so hard he had to sit down. "You did it!" Olivia yelled at the phone. "Victoria, you fixed it!" "We fixed it together," Victoria said, and on her end of the call in her spotless, empty apartment, she was wiping her eyes and hoping the little girl couldn't tell. After Olivia was in bed, Nathan picked the phone back up. "Sorry about that. She's a lot." "Don't." Victoria's voice was raw. "Don't apologize. That was Nathan. Do you know what I did tonight before you called? I read a 200-page acquisition report and ate dinner standing up over the sink. And then I watched your daughter make a volcano, and it was the best night I've had in—" She stopped. "In longer than I want to say out loud. She likes you." Nathan sounded almost surprised by it. "She doesn't like everybody. She's got good radar, that kid. Better than mine." "What does her radar say about me?" "It says you're okay." Nathan smiled. "That's high praise from Olivia. She once told my commanding officer he had a boring face." Victoria laughed until she couldn't breathe. But the thing about walls Nathan knew is that they don't come down all at once. And neither of them had told the whole truth yet. Nathan hadn't told her how bad the money thing scared him. How every time she mentioned some casual detail of her life, a plane, a property, a name he recognized from the news, he felt the gap between them open up like water under a hull. And Victoria hadn't told him how rich she truly was. Not really. He knew the name Ashford. He knew it was a big company. But she had been careful, so careful to keep the scale of it fuzzy, because every single time in her life that scale had come into focus, it had killed whatever it touched. It was Ryan who forced it into the open. He called Nathan on a Sunday. "So," Ryan said, "Marisol saw something on the internet." "On the internet?" Nathan was folding laundry. "That covers a lot of ground, Ryan." "You want to tell me why my best man is apparently texting one of the richest women in America?" Nathan stopped folding. "How do you—" "Because everybody who was at my wedding saw you dance with Victoria Ashford, you idiot. You know how many people asked me about it? My own mother asked me about it. She said, 'Was that the nice quiet one, dancing with the billionaire?'" "She's not," Nathan started and then stopped, because he didn't actually know how to finish that sentence. "How rich are we talking, Ryan?" There was a pause on the line. "You don't know?" "Know what?" "Nathan." Ryan's voice was careful now. "Buddy, she's not rich like a doctor's rich. She's not rich like a guy with a boat rich. Victoria Ashford is her company builds half the systems on the ships you serve on. She's on the cover of magazines. She testified in front of Congress last year. She's Nathan. She's one of the richest people in the country. Like in the country." Nathan sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, laundry forgotten. "You really didn't know," Ryan said. "I knew the name. I didn't know the—" Nathan rubbed his face. "She never said. We talk about my kid Ryan. We talk about volcanoes and cereal and my bad knee. She never said. Are you okay?" "I don't know," Nathan said honestly. "I gotta go." He hung up. And then he sat on the edge of his bed in his small, careful house, and he thought about a woman on a phone screen crying over a baking soda volcano, and he thought about the gap between their worlds that he'd been trying so hard not to look at, and he felt it open up all the way wide and dark and cold. He didn't call her that night, or the next. Victoria noticed immediately. 2 days of silence from a man who called every night. She noticed the way you notice a heartbeat stop. On the third day, she couldn't stand it. She called. He didn't pick up. She called again. Nothing. And Victoria Ashford, who had never in her life chased anyone, sat in the back of a town car outside a fundraiser she was supposed to be headlining and called a third time. And when it went to voicemail, she heard herself say in a voice that shook, "It's me. You're not answering, and I think I know why, and Nathan, please. Please just call me back. Don't do this without telling me why. You told me you don't start things with lies. So don't end them with silence. That's the same thing." She stopped. "Please." He called back at midnight. "I'm sorry," he said before she could speak. "Why didn't you tell me you knew?" Because I didn't know how to say it. Nathan's voice was rough. He was on the porch again. Ryan told me how big it is, who you are. And I've been sitting out here for 2 days, feeling like the biggest fool in America talking to you about my bad knee and my kids' crooked pigtails when you could buy the whole town I live in and not notice the dent in your bank account. Nathan, let me finish, please. He took a breath. I looked you up. Finally. I made myself do it. And I saw the magazines, the Congress thing, the company, and you know what I felt? Tell me. Small. His voice cracked on the word. I felt small, like I've been playing a game I didn't know the stakes of. Like any second now, you're gonna wake up and realize you're Victoria Ashford, and I'm a guy with a mortgage and a leaky roof and one good uniform, and this whole thing is gonna feel to you like it should have felt from the start, like a mistake. There was a long silence. Are you done? Victoria asked quietly. Yeah, good, because now I'm going to talk, and you're going to listen the way you make me listen. She took a breath. Do you want to know what I felt all those years being Victoria Ashford? I felt small. Every single day. Because I figured out young that nobody wanted me. They wanted the thing attached to me. The money, the access, the name. I would walk into a room and watch people's faces change, watch them calculate, and I learned to calculate right back, and I got so good at it that I forgot there was any other way for a person to look at me. Her voice was shaking now. And then I watched a man face down Marcus Vale for his friend, and that man looked at me like I was a lamp. And I danced with him, and he talked to me about tooth fairies, and for one song I got to be a person instead of a bank. Do you understand? You didn't make me feel small, Nathan. You're the only person alive who's ever made me feel like a human being. Nathan closed his eyes. On the porch in the dark, a tear ran down a Navy officer's face, and he let it. I don't know how to do this, he said. Your world. I don't have the clothes for it. I don't have the manners. I'd embarrass you. You could never embarrass me. You've got more dignity in you than every person I met last year combined, and I don't want you in my world, Nathan. God, that's the last thing I want. Victoria laughed wet and shaky. I want to be in yours. Do you understand? I want the crooked pigtails and the volcano and the marshmallow cereal. I want the small, careful life. I've had the big one. It's empty. I would trade all of it, every dollar, do you hear me, every single dollar for one Tuesday night of being someone's family. Nathan couldn't speak. Say something, Victoria whispered. Come here, Nathan said. What? Come here, to the house. Meet Olivia in person, not on a screen. If you mean all that, if you really mean it, then come see what it actually is. The leaky roof, the mess, the whole small thing. And if you still want it after you see it up close, his voice broke, then I guess we'll figure the rest out. There was a silence on the line, and then Victoria Ashford, in the back of a town car outside a fundraiser she'd walked out of without a word, said the 4 words that would change everything. I'm already on my way. She drove herself. That was the part Nathan couldn't get over later. She didn't send a car. She didn't fly. Victoria Ashford got behind the wheel of a car and drove 2.5 hours south through the dark alone, and pulled up in front of a small house with a leaky roof at 9 o'clock at night. And when Nathan opened the door, she was standing on his porch in jeans and a plain sweater, with no makeup, and her hair pulled back, looking nothing at all like the woman on the magazine covers, and everything. Like a person who was terrified and hopeful in equal measure. I didn't know what to wear, she said. I don't have clothes for meeting a 6-year-old. I stood in my closet for an hour. Nathan looked at her, and his whole heart turned over. You look perfect. Is she asleep? Should be. But she heard a car, so... Daddy! Olivia's voice floated down the hall. Is somebody here? Nathan winced. That's a yes. And then there were small feet on the hardwood, and Olivia appeared in the hallway in her dinosaur pajamas, hair wild from the pillow, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had seen better decades. She stopped when she saw Victoria. She looked at her for a long, frank 6-year-old moment. You're the volcano lady, Olivia said. Victoria's breath caught. That's me. You're really tall in person. I'm wearing... Victoria looked down at her flat shoes. I'm actually not tonight. Olivia considered this. Then she padded across the floor right up to Victoria and looked up at her with those enormous serious eyes and asked the question that Nathan would remember for the rest of his life. The question that made his heart stop dead in his chest. Are you gonna be my daddy's girlfriend? Nathan made a sound like a dying engine. Olivia. But Victoria had already dropped down to a crouch, so she was eye level with the little girl, and her voice when it came was steadier and gentler than Nathan had ever heard it. Would that be okay with you? Victoria asked. If I were... Olivia thought about it. She thought about it the way she thought about important things, serial bedtimes, whether big kids still got stories. She looked Victoria up and down. She looked at her father, who was standing frozen in the doorway, not breathing. Do you make him happy? Olivia asked. Victoria's eyes filled. I'm trying to. Because he's sad a lot. Olivia said matter of fact, in the devastating way that only children can be. He thinks I don't know, but I know. He puts his happy face on for me. But sometimes at night, I hear him not sleeping. Nathan turned away and put a hand over his mouth. He had never known. He had spent 6 years believing he'd hidden it, believing he'd kept his pain sealed away from her, and all this time, his little girl had been lying awake, listening to her father not sleep. I hear him too, Victoria said softly. When we talk on the phone, I hear it. Olivia nodded as if this confirmed something, and then she made her decision the way she made all her decisions completely and all at once. Okay, she said. You can be his girlfriend, but you have to read good. He does the voices. Whoever's his girlfriend has to do the voices. I'll practice the voices, Victoria promised, and her voice broke clean in half on the word, and she was laughing and crying at the same time, crouched on the floor of a small house with a leaky roof, and Nathan was watching from the doorway with his hand over his mouth, and none of the three of them wanted to be anywhere else in the entire world. That's it. She stayed for the story that night. Olivia insisted. She climbed into bed and patted the spot next to her and Victoria. Victoria Ashford, the most powerful woman in the Pacific Northwest, kicked off her flat shoes and climbed onto a 6-year-old's dinosaur sheets and read Where the Wild Things Are, and she did the voices badly, wonderfully, and Olivia fell asleep halfway through with her head on Victoria's arm. Victoria didn't move for a long time. She just lay there in the dark with a sleeping child breathing against her, afraid that if she moved the whole thing would dissolve like a dream. When she finally came out, Nathan was in the kitchen. He handed her a cup of tea without a word. Their fingers touched on the mug. She never lets anyone read to her but me, Nathan said quietly. Never. Not the neighbor, not Ryan, nobody. 6 years. I did the voices wrong. You did the voices perfect. They stood in the small kitchen with their tea. Two people who'd walled themselves off from the world, so completely standing in the wreckage of those walls, not quite sure what to do with the open space. Nathan, Victoria said, I have to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything. Okay, I've never had this. Any of this. I built a company worth more money than most countries, and I have never once, not one single time in my whole life, had a night like tonight. Her hands were shaking around the mug. And it terrifies me. Because now that I know what it feels like, I can't go back to the empty apartment and the reports over the sink. I can't. You've ruined it for me. You and a 6-year-old and a baking soda volcano have ruined my entire life, and I don't want it back, and I'm scared to death. Nathan set his tea down. He crossed the small kitchen. And he did the thing he'd wanted to do since a woman crossed a ballroom to ask him to dance. He took her face gently in his rough, careful hands. Then don't go back, he said. It's not that simple. My world doesn't. Nathan, the second people find out about this, and they will find out, it's going to get ugly. You have no idea. They'll come after you. They'll come after her. My board, the press, all of it. I've spent my whole life being a target, and I have never once had anything they could actually take from me. And now? She looked toward the hallway toward the sleeping child. Now I do. I've been shot at, Nathan said quietly. I've had water rising up my legs in a compartment with the hatch jammed. I've buried men I loved. You think I'm scared of your board of directors and some magazines? You should be. Maybe. But I've been scared and small and safe for 6 years, Victoria. 6 years of a life built to keep the pain out. And you know what it kept out along with the pain. He shook his head. Everything. All of it. Every good thing. I built a wall so high I forgot there was a sky. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. I'm done being safe. Let 'em come. Victoria looked up at him, at this steady, honest, unbreakable man standing in a kitchen with a leaky roof over their heads, and she made a decision that no amount of money could have bought and no board could have approved. Okay, she whispered. Let them come. And somewhere out in the dark, though, neither of them knew it yet. In a parked car down the street, a photographer with a long lens had already taken the first picture. The billionaire's car in the driveway of a Navy single dad, the two of them visible through the kitchen window, standing close, and the whole quiet, fragile, hard-won thing they'd built about to be dragged out into a light that would try its very best to burn it down. The photograph ran on a Thursday. Nathan found out the way most people find out their life has been turned inside out from someone else. He was doing a system check on the base when a young petty officer he barely knew looked up from his phone, then looked at Nathan, then looked back at his phone with an expression that made Nathan's stomach drop. "Lieutenant," the kid said carefully. Is this you?" He held up the phone, and there it was. His driveway, his kitchen window, and through it, blurred but unmistakable Victoria's face, and his own standing close in the lamplight. The headline underneath was 2 inches tall. Billionaire's Secret Romance, Ashford slumming it with Navy single dad. Nathan didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at the picture of the best night of his life turned into something cheap and ugly by a caption written by a stranger. "That's my house," he said finally. "That's my kitchen." By noon, it was everywhere. By evening, the story had mutated the way these things do, splitting into a dozen versions, each worse than the last. One outlet ran the numbers side by side, her net worth in 11 figures, his Navy salary in 5 like a scoreboard. Another dug up the fact of his abandoned marriage and turned it into a question. What kind of woman gets left by her husband? And then when they realized it was his wife who'd left, pivoted seamlessly to, what's he hiding that made her run? A third ran a sources close to the family piece that had no sources and no family in it, only invention. And the comments. God, the comments. Nathan made the mistake of reading them exactly once. Gold digger. Charity project. She'll be bored in a month. He's using her for the money. She's using him for the optics. He looked up from the phone, feeling like he'd been kicked, and then he thought about Olivia, and he felt something colder than fear. "They can say what they want about me," he told Victoria that night, his voice tight over the phone. "I don't care. I've been called worse by better. But if they touch her, if one of these people so much as prints her name, they won't get near her," Victoria said. "I've already put people on the school, quietly. Nobody she'll ever see. But nobody gets within 100 feet of that little girl. You put security on my daughter's school without telling me." There was a pause. "I was going to tell you. I'm telling you now. Nathan, I know this world. I know what they do. I should have warned you what would happen, and I didn't because I was—" Her voice wavered. "Because I was happy, and I didn't want to think about it. And that was selfish, and I'm sorry." Nathan closed his eyes. He was angry, but not at her. He was angry at all of it, the whole faceless machine that had reached into his kitchen and taken the one good thing and put it on display for strangers to spit on. "It's not your fault," he said finally. "You didn't take the picture. I brought it into your life." "No." Nathan's voice was firm. "I opened the door. You knocked, and I opened it. I knew what you were. I chose it. So don't you take that from me by making it your fault. We chose this together, or we didn't choose it at all." Victoria was quiet. and then softly, "How did I find you? How is it possible in a whole world of people that I found the one man who'd say that?" "You crossed a ballroom," Nathan said. "Best walk you ever took." But the machine was only warming up. Victoria's board convened an emergency session 2 days later, and she sat at the head of a long table and watched 11 faces she'd made. Rich decide they had opinions about her personal life. It was Gerald Ashby who said it out loud. Gerald silver-haired, the man who'd been on the board since her father's day, who'd voted against her on every meaningful decision for a decade, and been wrong every time. "Victoria, the optics are a disaster," Gerald said. "The stock dipped 4% this week. 4%. Investors are asking questions. Our largest defense contracts require a certain stability, a certain image. And you're on the front page carrying on with an enlisted man. He's an officer, Gerald, a lieutenant. Read your own scandal sheet. You know what I mean." "I don't think I do." Victoria's voice was very calm, which anyone who knew her would have recognized as the most dangerous thing she could be. "Say what you mean." Gerald leaned forward. "I mean that this company cannot afford for its chief executive to be a punchline. I mean that when you took this chair, you took on a responsibility to the shareholders that supersedes your romantic hobbies. I mean that a woman in your position cannot simply run off and play house with some," he waved a hand, "some sailor and his child and expect the market not to react. End it, quietly, before it costs us a contract." The room went silent. 11 faces waited. And Victoria Ashford, who had spent her entire adult life doing exactly what these men expected of her, who had built an empire winning a fight with her dead father's ghost, felt something in her chest go very still and very clear. "Gerald," she said, "how long did you know my father?" 30 years. "Why?" 30 years. "So you'll remember that he built this company on one principle. He said it to me when I was a girl. He said, 'Vicky, we make the things that protect the people who protect us. Never forget who's on the other end of what we build.'" She stood up. "For 20 years I forgot. I ran this company like it was a machine for making money, and it made a great deal of money, and I was miserable every single day. And then I danced with a man who has actually served on the ships that run on our systems. A man who has trusted his life to the things we build in this building while you and I argued about margins. And do you know what he talks about, Gerald? He talks about his daughter. He talks about pulling drowning men out of a flooded compartment and never mentioning it to anyone. He is the person on the other end of everything we make. He is the whole point." She planted her hands on the table. "You want me to end it to protect a stock price. I'm going to tell you something, and I want every person at this table to hear it clearly. I would burn the stock price to the ground before I'd give him up. If that's a problem for this board, then the board can vote, right now, on whether I stay. But nobody tells me who I'm allowed to love. I've let this company take everything else from me. My 20s, my father's memory, every ordinary thing. It does not get to take this, too." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. "Anyone want to call that vote?" Victoria asked quietly. Gerald looked at the other faces around the table looking for allies and found 10 people carefully studying their own hands. He sat back slowly. The vote didn't come. It never does when the person calling for it knows she'll win. "That's what I thought," Victoria said. "This meeting is over." Nathan's fight was quieter, but it cut just as deep. It came from Commander Reyes, his CO, a hard, fair man Nathan respected. Reyes called him in and shut the door, which was never a good sign. "Cole, sit down." Reyes didn't sit. He stood by the window with his back half turned. "I'm going to talk to you as a man for a minute, not as your commander, and then I'm going to put the commander hat back on, and I want you to hear both parts. Understand?" "Yes, sir." "The man part first." Reyes turned. "I've known you 11 years. You're one of the finest officers I've ever served with, and I've served with a lot. What you did after your wife left, raising that little girl, never once letting it touch your work, never once asking for special treatment. I've watched you do the hardest thing a man can do without complaint. So, as a man, Cole, good for you. You deserve something good. I mean that." Thank you, sir. Now the commander hat. Reyes's face hardened. There are people above me asking questions. This story is loud, and the Navy does not love loud. There's talk that the relationship is a distraction, a liability, that a woman with her government contracts and an officer with your clearance is a conflict waiting to happen. Nobody's saying it in writing yet, but it's being said. He paused. Some of them are suggesting that your career would be a lot smoother if this went away. Nathan felt the old cold settle in his chest. Are you ordering me to end it, sir? No. Reyes said it flatly. I can't and I wouldn't, but I'd be failing you if I didn't tell you the water you're standing in. This could cost you Cole. Your next promotion, your next assignment, maybe more. You've got 14 years in, 6 more, and you've got your 20-year pension security for that little girl. And you're putting it on the table for a woman you met at a wedding. Reyes leaned on the desk. So, I'm asking you, as your commander, and as a man who respects the hell out of you, is she worth it? Nathan didn't hesitate. Sir, permission to speak completely freely. Granted. I spent 6 years being safe, doing everything right, keeping my head down, making my numbers, never making a wave. All so nothing could touch my daughter or my career. And I was dead inside, sir. I want to be honest with you because you've been honest with me. I was a dead man walking around in a good man's uniform. And then a woman crossed a room and asked me to dance. And for the first time in 6 years, I felt like a person instead of a job I was doing. He stood a little straighter. You ask me if she's worth it. Sir, my whole life I've been told to weigh the cost of things. And I've decided there's some things you don't put on the scale. This is one. So yes, sir. She's worth it. She's worth all of it. And if the Navy wants to take my promotion for loving somebody, then the Navy can have my promotion, but it can't have this. Reyes looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind the hard face. Something that might have been envy, or respect, or both. You know, Reyes said quietly, I had something like that once. Before the service ate my whole life. Let it go because I was told to. He straightened. Commander hat's coming off now, Cole. Off for good on this subject. He held out his hand. Don't let it go, whatever it costs. You hear me? Don't you let it go. Nathan shook his hand, unable to speak. Dismissed, Reyes said gruffly, and turned back to the window so Nathan wouldn't see his face. They survived the board. They survived the Navy. And for a few days, Nathan let himself believe the worst had passed, that they'd stood in the storm and the storm had blown over. He was wrong. The worst hadn't come yet. The worst had a name he hadn't spoken in 5.5 years. She showed up on a Saturday. Nathan was in the front yard, teaching Olivia to ride her bike without training wheels running alongside her, one hand hovering at the seat, the two of them laughing, when a rideshare pulled up to the curb and a woman got out, and Nathan's whole body went cold before his mind even caught up to why. Daddy! Olivia had felt him stop. Daddy, don't let go. But Nathan had already let go, and Olivia wobbled and put her feet down, and Nathan was standing very still in his own front yard, staring at a ghost. Hello, Nathan, the woman said. 5.5 years. She looked older, harder around the eyes. But it was her. It was Rebecca, the woman who'd left a note and a baby and vanished into a life he'd never learned the shape of. Get in the house, Bug, Nathan said quietly. But my bike. Olivia Grace, in the house, now, please. Something in his voice made her go. She wheeled her bike up the walk, casting looks back over her shoulder at the strange woman by the curb, and the screen door banged shut behind her. Nathan turned to face the mother of his child. What are you doing here, Rebecca? That's her? That's Olivia. Rebecca was looking at the door, and there was something in her face Nathan couldn't read and didn't trust. She's gotten so big. They do that. 6 years'll do it. Nathan kept his voice level with an effort that cost him everything. What do you want? Can't a mother want to see her daughter? You lost the word mother when you left her with a neighbor and disappeared. Nathan took a step forward. I looked for you. Did you know that? For a year. I thought something happened to you. I filed reports. And then I found out you were fine. You were just gone. You chose gone. So don't you stand in my yard and say the word mother to me." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "People change, Nathan. I've changed. I'm in a better place now. I've thought a lot about the choices I made. And I think Olivia deserves to have her mother in her life." "You should have thought about that 5 years ago." "I'm thinking about it now." And then Nathan saw it. He saw it in the way her eyes had flicked just once toward the newspaper machine on the corner, the one that still had his and Victoria's faces in the window. He saw it in the calculation behind her concern, the same shine he'd watched drain off Marcus Vale's face in a ballroom a lifetime ago. And the cold in his chest turned to something like grief. "That's what this is," Nathan said slowly. "You saw the papers." "I don't know what you—" 5.5 years, Rebecca. Not a card, not a call, not a dollar. And then my face ends up next to a billionaire's in the news, and suddenly you've done a lot of thinking about being a mother." He laughed, and there was no humor in it at all. "You didn't come back for her. You came back for the money. You looked at that headline, and you saw a payday, and here you are." Rebecca's face went hard, the pretense falling away like a mask. "You have no idea what my life has been. And now you're living up there with your rich girlfriend while I've got nothing. That child is half mine. Nathan, half. And a court might have a lot to say about a little girl being raised by a single man in the military who's now dragging some scandal through the papers, exposing her to God knows what. An unstable environment. That's what they call it. Unstable." There it was, the knife out in the open at last. "Get off my property," Nathan said. "You'll hear from my lawyer." "Get off my property, Rebecca. Before I forget, I was raised to be polite to people who don't deserve it." She went. But at the curb, she turned back, and her parting shot landed exactly where she'd aimed it. "She's a beautiful little girl, Nathan. Any judge would want to make sure she ends up somewhere stable, somewhere with a mother." And then she got in the car and was gone, and Nathan stood alone in his front yard, shaking with his daughter's abandoned bike lying on its side in the grass. He didn't call Victoria right away. He sat in Olivia's room for an hour while she showed him a drawing she'd made, and he said all the right things in all the right places, and inside he was drowning in a compartment with the hatch jammed shut. When Olivia was finally asleep, he called Victoria and told her everything. And Victoria, who had negotiated with governments, who had faced down her own board without blinking, went silent in a way that scared him. "Say something," Nathan said. "I'm going to fix this." Her voice had changed. It had gone flat and cold and absolute, and Nathan realized he was hearing for the first time the woman the magazines wrote about, the one who'd built an empire, the one people were afraid of. "I have the best family law team in the country on retainer. I'll have them on a plane tomorrow. She won't get within a mile of that child, Nathan. I'll bury her. No." "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no. I mean, I know exactly what you can do, and that's exactly what scares me." Nathan pressed the phone hard against his ear. "Victoria, listen to me. If we win this with your money, if I sit in that courtroom and let a team of $10,000 an hour lawyers bury the mother of my child, then every ugly thing they've said about us is true. Then I am using your money. Then Olivia grows up as the little girl whose rich stepmother crushed her real mom with lawyers. I won't do that to her. I won't do it to you. And I won't do it to me. So what, you want to lose her? I want to win her the right way. I want to win because I'm her father, and I've been there every single day, and I love her more than my own life. Not because I outspent somebody." His voice cracked. "Victoria, my whole case is that I'm the one who shows up. That I'm the one who was there. The second I hide behind your money, I've lost the only thing that makes me her father, instead of just a guy who can afford better lawyers." There was a long silence on the line, and when Victoria spoke again, her voice had changed once more. The cold gone out of it, something softer and more shaken in its place. "You're right," she said quietly. "God. You're right, and I hate it, and you're right." A shaky breath. "Do you know I've never once in my life solved a problem without money? Not once. It's the only tool I've ever had, and you're standing there telling me to put it down. Not put it down, Nathan said gently. Just not lead with it. There's a difference. He hesitated. I'll take your help. I need your help. I can't afford a lawyer who can go up against whatever she brings, and my pride's not so big I'll pretend otherwise. But the lawyer works for me, not against her. We don't attack Rebecca. We protect Olivia. We tell the truth, and the truth is that I'm her father, and I've never once left. That's it. That's the whole case. Can your fancy lawyers do that? The best family lawyer in the country is a woman named Ruth Kellerman, Victoria said slowly. She's terrifying, and she once told me the cases she's proudest of are the ones she won clean. I think... A pause. I think you two are going to like each other. Then let's call Ruth. Nathan. Yeah, every man I've ever known, if I offered them my lawyers and my money to win a fight, they'd have taken it and thanked me and used every dirty trick in the book. Her voice was thick. You just turned down an army because you'd rather win with the truth. Do you understand that I have never in my entire life met anyone who would do that? It's not special, Nathan said. It's just right and wrong. Most people know the difference. They just talk themselves out of it. No, Victoria said softly. It's special. You have no idea how special it is. Stay on the phone with me, just for a while. I don't want to hang up yet. So he stayed, and two lonely people who'd found each other against every possible odd sat on the phone in the dark, hundreds of miles apart, holding on to the sound of each other's breathing, bracing for a fight that would decide whether the small, careful family they'd built would survive at all. Ruth Kellerman was everything Victoria had promised, and worse. 61 years old silver bob, reading glasses she used as a weapon, a voice like a door closing on a vault. She flew out, sat at Nathan's kitchen table, drank his bad coffee without complaint, and listened to the whole story with her hands folded. Let me make sure I understand, Ruth said when he'd finished. You have unlimited resources at your disposal through Ms. Ashford, and you want to run this case like you don't. I want to run it clean, Nathan said. I want to win because I should win, not because I can afford to. Ruth took off her glasses. She looked at him for a long moment. Do you know how many clients I've had in 40 years who asked me to do that too, including you? She put the glasses back on. It's going to be harder. You understand that the clean way is harder. She's going to throw mud, and we're not going to throw it back, and there will be days you'll want to. You'll have to trust the truth to do the heavy lifting, and the truth is slow, and it doesn't always feel like it's winning. I've spent 14 years trusting the truth to do the heavy lifting, Nathan said. It's the only thing I've got that I've never once regretted trusting. Ruth almost smiled. Then here's how it works. She's going to file for custody claiming instability, the deployments, the scandal, the sudden appearance of a high-profile girlfriend. She's going to paint a picture of chaos. And we are going to sit there and calmly and with receipts prove that the only chaos in that little girl's life walked out the door 5.5 years ago and just walked back in smelling money. She tapped the table. The deployments are our biggest exposure. A father who's gone at sea for months. What happens to Olivia when you deploy? Nathan's stomach tightened. This was the fear that woke him at night. Mrs. Alvarez next door. She's watched her since she was a baby, but... He forced himself to say it. But that's the thing they'll go after, isn't it? That when I'm at sea, she doesn't have a parent, just a neighbor. The kitchen was quiet. She'd have me. Both of them turned. Victoria was standing in the doorway. She'd driven down again, and she was leaning against the frame with her arms crossed, and there was something fierce and settled in her face. When he deploys, Victoria said, she'd have me, if you'd let me. I'm not going anywhere. I want to be the person who's there when he's at sea. I want to be exactly the thing they say is the scandal, the reason she's not alone. She looked at Nathan, and her voice softened. I know it's fast. I know we haven't. I know. But I'm telling you, and I'm telling your terrifying lawyer both at once, so I can't take it back. When he's gone, I'll be there. That's not a scandal. That's a family. Ruth Kellerman looked between the two of them, and this time she did smile, a small dry lawyer's smile. "Well," she said, "that changes the picture considerably." She started writing. "The court's afraid she has a part-time father and a neighbor. We're going to show them she has a father, a stepmother-to-be, who reorganized her entire life to be present and a home more stable than 90% of the two-parent households in this county." She looked up. "Ms. Ashford, are you prepared to say that on a witness stand, under oath with the press outside?" "Try and stop me," Victoria said. The hearing was set for 6 weeks out, and they were the longest 6 weeks of Nathan's life. Rebecca's lawyers came out swinging exactly as Ruth had predicted, filings full of the words unstable and absent, and exposure a portrait of Olivia as a neglected child, shuttled between a deployed father and a paid neighbor, now thrust into a media circus by a father chasing a rich woman. They leaked selectively to the same outlets that had run the kitchen photo. "Navy Dad in Custody Fight, Is He Fit to Parent?" Nathan read the headline and felt the old cold deeper than ever, because this time it wasn't his reputation on the table. It was Olivia. And the worst part, the part that hollowed him out, was that he had to explain some of it to her. "Daddy," Olivia asked one night, small in her bed, rabbit clutch tight, "is my mommy trying to take me away?" Nathan's heart stopped. "Where'd you hear that bug?" "Kids at school. Their mommies read it on their phones." Her lip trembled. "Is it true? Is she going to make me leave you?" And Nathan, who had faced water rising in a flooded compartment, who had faced down a $4 billion man and a hostile board, and the whole ugly machine of the press, sat on the edge of his daughter's bed and faced the hardest moment of his life. He gathered her up into his lap. "Listen to me," he said. "Listen close, because this is the truest thing I'll ever tell you. A long time ago, your mommy went away. That wasn't your fault, not one tiny bit of it, and it wasn't because you weren't the most wonderful thing in the whole world, because you were and you are. Sometimes grown-ups get lost. That's what happened. She got lost." He held her tighter. "And now she's back, and there are some grown-up people who have to decide some grown-up things, and it's not fair that you have to feel scared about it. But I need you to hear me. Look at me, Bug." She looked up, tears sliding down her face. "I have never left you," Nathan said, his own voice breaking. "Not for one day, and I never, ever will. No matter what any judge or lawyer or newspaper says. You are my daughter and I am your daddy, and that is the one thing in this whole entire world that nobody can change. You understand. Some things you don't put on the scale. And you, Olivia Grace Cole, are the thing I'd never ever weigh against anything. Not for all the money in the world." She threw her arms around his neck and cried into his shoulder, and Nathan held her and cried too silently, and down the hall, Victoria stood in the dark where they couldn't see her. One hand pressed over her mouth and made a promise to herself that whatever it took, whatever it cost, whatever she had to become, that little girl was not going to lose the one parent who'd never once let go. The night before the hearing, the three of them sat together on the couch. Olivia had finally fallen asleep between them. Nathan looked over her head at Victoria. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said quietly. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Victoria agreed. "We're a family. A judge can't make us one, and a judge can't unmake us. We already are." Nathan reached over the sleeping child and took her hand. "I'm scared," he admitted. It cost him to say it. "For the first time in a long time, I'm actually scared, because I've got something to lose again." "I know." Victoria squeezed his hand. "So do I. It's terrible, isn't it? Having something to lose." She looked down at the sleeping girl between them, at the crooked pigtails, at the stuffed rabbit. "I wouldn't trade it back for anything. Being safe. I know exactly what you meant now in your kitchen all those weeks ago. I built a wall so high I forgot there was a sky." She looked up at him, eyes shining in the dark. "Thank you for the sky, Nathan." And they sat there, the three of them, one small family, holding the line against everything the world could throw, waiting for the morning that would decide it all. The courtroom was smaller than Nathan had expected. He'd braced himself for something grand, something that matched the size of what was at stake. and instead it was a plain room with fluorescent lights and worn wooden benches and a state seal on the wall that had faded at the edges. It struck him sitting there in his dress blues that the most important room in his entire life looked like a place you'd renew a driver's license. He'd worn the uniform. Ruth had asked him about it the night before, and he'd said he wasn't wearing it to perform. "I'm wearing it because it's who I am," he'd told her. "Not a costume. When I stand up in that room, I want to be standing there as everything I actually am. A sailor, a father. That's it." Ruth had nodded slowly. "Good, because the second it looks like a costume, we lose the jury, except there's no jury. There's just a judge. And Judge Warren has been doing family court for 22 years, and she can smell a performance from the parking lot. So don't perform. Just be true. The truth is the only card we're playing, and it's a better card than they think." Now Ruth sat beside him, calm as still water, a legal pad in front of her, with almost nothing written on it. Across the aisle, Rebecca sat between two lawyers in expensive suits, and Nathan made himself look at her. Really look at her, the woman he'd once loved and married, and built a life with before she'd dismantled it. She wouldn't meet his eyes. That told him something. And behind him in the first row of the gallery sat Victoria. Not in a designer gown, not in the armor of the woman on the magazine covers. In a simple navy dress, no jewelry to speak of, her hands folded in her lap, present as a mountain. When Nathan had glanced back at her before the judge came in, she'd given him the smallest nod. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. All rise." Judge Warren was a small woman with silver hair and eyes that didn't miss anything. She sat, put on her glasses, and looked at the two tables in front of her, with the weariness of someone who had watched 1,000 families come apart in this room. "This is a petition for modification of custody," she said. "I've read the filings. I want to say something before we begin, and I want both parties to hear it. I don't care about the newspapers. I want that understood. I have not read them. I will not read them. And if any attorney in this room tries to bring the press into my courtroom, they will regret it. This court cares about exactly one thing, the well-being of a 6-year-old child named Olivia Cole. Everything else is noise. Are we clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," said both tables. "Good. Ms. Vale, your petition. Let's hear it." Rebecca's lead lawyer rose. His name was Prescott, and he was smooth in the way that expensive things are smooth, and he began to paint a picture. He talked about a child raised by a father who disappeared to sea for months at a time. He talked about a rotating cast of neighbors and babysitters. He talked carefully about a recent and very public relationship that had thrust this child into a media firestorm, exposing her to public scrutiny no 6-year-old should endure. He used the word instability, the way a carpenter uses a hammer over and over, driving it in. "And now," Prescott said, "into this environment of absence and chaos comes a mother. A mother who admits she made mistakes, who does not stand here claiming to be perfect, but who is present, who is stable, who is ready finally to give this little girl what she has never had, the steady everyday presence of a parent who does not leave." Nathan's hands curled into fists under the table. Ruth's hand came to rest lightly on his forearm. "Wait, Ms. Kellerman," Judge Warren said. "Your response." Ruth rose. She didn't have notes. She didn't raise her voice. "Your Honor, my colleague has used the word stable 11 times in the last 10 minutes. I counted. I'd like to talk about stability too, because I agree with him completely that it's the only thing that matters here. So let's define it. Stability isn't a word. It's a record. It's a pattern of showing up day after day, year after year, especially when it's hard. So I'm not going to argue with Mr. Prescott about stability. I'm going to prove it, with the record. May I call my first witness?" "You may." And Ruth Kellerman began methodically to build a wall of truth so high that no amount of expensive rhetoric could climb it. She called Mrs. Alvarez the neighbor, 73 years old in her Sunday best, terrified of the courtroom, and fierce as a lioness once she started talking. Prescott had painted her as evidence of Nathan's absence, the hired help standing in for a missing father. Ruth turned her into the opposite. "Mrs. Alvarez, how long have you known Olivia?" Since she was 3 weeks old. The old woman's chin lifted. Since her mama left her on my doorstep near enough. Objection, Prescott said. She's telling the truth. Mrs. Alvarez shot back before the judge could rule. I was there. You weren't. Mrs. Alvarez, Judge Warren said not unkindly. Let the lawyers do the objecting. Just answer the questions. Yes, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am, Ruth continued. In the years you've helped care for Olivia when her father is deployed, tell me about him. Tell me about Nathan Cole as a father. And Mrs. Alvarez told her. She told about the man who called from the other side of the world every single night. He could get a connection, who'd wake at 3 a.m, his time to catch Olivia before school. She told about the deployment when Olivia had gotten pneumonia and Nathan had gotten emergency leave and flown 31 hours to sit by her hospital bed, and then flown 31 hours back. She told about the birthdays he'd never missed the way he did the little girl's hair himself, badly lovingly every morning he was home. She told about a Christmas he was at sea when he'd arranged somehow for a package to arrive for Olivia every single day of December 25 gifts so she wouldn't feel he was gone. That man, Mrs. Alvarez said, her voice shaking, pointing at Nathan, is the best father I have seen in 73 years of living. And I raised 4 of my own, and I have watched 100 more grow up on that street. I have never... Her voice broke. I have never seen a child more loved. And I have never once, not one single time in 6 years, seen that woman, she pointed at Rebecca, until I opened my newspaper and saw she wanted him for his money. Objection. Withdrawn, Ruth said smoothly. No further questions. She called Commander Reyes. He came in his uniform, and he stood at parade rest even in the witness box, and when Ruth asked him about Lieutenant Nathan Cole, he spoke with the flat precision of a man giving a report. Lieutenant Cole is among the finest officers I have commanded in 26 years of service, Reyes said. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I've watched this man do something harder than anything the Navy ever asked of him. I've watched him raise a child alone, and never once let it compromise his duty, and never once let his duty compromise his child. Do you have any idea how rare that is? I've had officers fall apart over a bad divorce. This man had his wife vanish and a newborn on his hands, and he just held the line, every day, for 6 years. Commander Prescott said on cross-rising, Isn't it true that Lieutenant Cole's deployments take him away from his daughter for months at a time? Yes. Months where he cannot be present, cannot tuck her in, cannot be there if she's sick or scared in the night. That's correct. So you'd agree that his career by its nature makes him an absent parent? Reyes looked at him for a long moment. Son, he said, I'm going to tell you something about absence. That man goes to sea so that other men's children can sleep safe in their beds. He is absent because he volunteered to stand between this country and the things that would hurt it. There's a word for that kind of absence. He leaned forward. We call it sacrifice. And if you think a child raised watching her father sacrifice for something bigger than himself is worse off than a child raised by someone who left the second, things got hard and came back. The second there was money, then you and I have very different ideas about what makes a good parent. The courtroom was silent. Prescott sat down. No further questions. And then Rebecca's side put on their case, and it was better than Nathan had feared. Because Rebecca was not stupid, and her lawyers were not cheap, and they had found the one true thing in all their invention, and they pressed on it. They put a child psychologist on the stand who spoke gently and credibly about the importance of a mother in a young girl's life, about attachment, about the developmental needs of a 6-year-old. They didn't attack Nathan directly. They were too smart for that. They praised him. They called him a good man, a good father. And then they said softly that a good father and a present mother were better than a good father alone, and that surely Olivia deserved both. And Rebecca herself took the stand and she cried. And the terrible thing was that some of the tears looked real. I know what I did, she said, her voice small. I know I left. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't hate myself for it. I was young and I was overwhelmed, and I made the worst mistake a person can make. but I've spent 5 years trying to become someone who deserves a second chance. And I'm not asking to take her from her father. I'm asking to be her mother. I'm asking for a chance to know my own little girl before it's too late. It was good. It was so good that Nathan felt the ground shift under him. He leaned over to Ruth and whispered, "She's winning. The judge is buying it." "The judge is listening," Ruth murmured back. "That's her job. Hold steady." "Ruth, if she cries like that on the stand." "Nathan." Ruth turned and looked at him with those flat, steady eyes. "In about 20 minutes, you're going to get up there, and you're not going to try to beat her. You're not going to attack her. You're going to do the one thing she cannot do because she doesn't have it, and you do. You're going to tell the truth about 6 years. Let her have her tears. Tears are cheap. 6 years of showing up is not." She patted his hand. "Now, are you ready?" "No," Nathan said honestly. "Good. Ready men make mistakes. Terrified men who love their children tell the truth. Get up there and tell the truth." "Bob." "The petitioner rests," Prescott said. "Ms. Kellerman, do you wish to call the respondent?" Ruth rose. "Your Honor, the respondent would like to speak. Not through me, himself." She glanced at Nathan. "I've advised him it's unusual," he insisted. Judge Warren looked at Nathan over her glasses. "Lieutenant Cole, you understand you have a very capable attorney whose job is to speak for you. I do, Your Honor, and I'm grateful for her. But this is my daughter. Nobody should have to speak for me about my daughter." Something flickered in the judge's tired eyes. "Then take the stand, Lieutenant." Nathan rose. He walked to the witness box, and he was aware of everything Rebecca watching him. Prescott's careful attention, Ruth's steady gaze, and behind him, Victoria sitting so still, she might have been carved from stone, willing her strength into his back. He sat. He was sworn in. And then Judge Warren said, "Go ahead, Lieutenant, in your own words." Nathan was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands. And then he looked up, not at the judge, not at the lawyers, but straight ahead, and he began. "When I was overseas," he said, "on my second deployment, there was a fire in one of the compartments below the waterline. 2 men got trapped. The compartment was flooding and burning at the same time, which shouldn't even be possible, but the sea doesn't care what's possible. And I went in after them, and I got them out, and afterward, everybody wanted to give me a medal for it, and I never told anybody the truth about why I did it." He paused. "I did it because I was thinking about my daughter. I was thinking if this is the day I don't come home, I need it to be a day I did something worth her being proud of. Every hard thing I have ever done. Your Honor, I have done thinking about that little girl. She is the reason I am brave. She is the reason I get up. She has been the reason for 6 years." The room was completely silent. Rebecca said she made the worst mistake a person can make, and that she hates herself for it, and I believe her. I do. I'm not here to tell you she's a monster. She's not. She's a person who got lost, and I've forgiven her for that, because I had to, because hate is a heavy thing to carry, and I had a baby to carry instead. He took a breath. But I want to tell you what those 6 years actually were. Not what a lawyer says they were. What they were. They were 3 a.m. feedings alone. They were teaching myself to do a little girl's hair off a video on the internet because there was nobody to show me. They were rushing home from the base with my heart in my throat because the school called and she'd fallen off the monkey bars. They were every fever, every nightmare, every first word, first step, first day of school, first lost tooth me. Just me. Not because I'm a hero, because I was there, and being there is 90% of the whole thing, and I was there. And they were the deployments too. The judge asked about those, and I won't lie to this court, those were the hardest part. Leaving her. Do you know what it's like to hold your daughter the night before you ship out and not know for certain you'll come back? To memorize her face, because you might have to live on that memory for 6 months. To call from the other side of the world at 3 in the morning, just to hear her voice for 90 seconds before the connection drops. His voice cracked. I did that, over and over. because I love this country, and I swore an oath, and because I wanted my daughter to grow up knowing her father stood for something. That's not absence. My commander used the right word. That's sacrifice. And every single time I left her with people who love her, and every single time I came back. I always came back. That's the difference. That's the whole difference between me and—" He stopped himself. He looked at Rebecca, and there was no cruelty in his face, only a kind of terrible sadness. "I came back," he said quietly. "That's all. I always came back." Judge Warren was very still. "Is that all, Lieutenant?" "No, ma'am. One more thing." Nathan straightened. "They've made a lot in the papers and in this room about the woman I'm seeing. Victoria Ashford. They've said I'm chasing money. They've said she's a scandal. They've said her presence in my daughter's life is proof of instability. So I want to say this on the record under oath so it can never be twisted again. I did not know who Victoria was when I met her. I danced with her at a wedding thinking she was just a woman I'd never see again, and I talked to her about my daughter's lost tooth because that's what I had to talk about. I found out later she was one of the richest people in the country, and my first honest thought, Your Honor, was that I should run, because I knew a man like me had no business with a woman like that, and I knew it would bring exactly the kind of ugliness it's brought. But here's the truth about Victoria Ashford, and I'll say it looking right at her." He turned, and he found Victoria's eyes in the gallery, and he held them. She could have solved this whole thing with money. The day Rebecca showed up, Victoria offered to put 10 lawyers on it and bury her, and I said no. And do you want to know what Victoria did? She put the money down. She agreed to fight clean. She sat in my kitchen with a lawyer and swore she'd tell nothing but the truth on this stand, even though the truth is harder and slower than a checkbook. A woman worth 11 figures agreed to win the hard way, because it was the right way. Because she understood that if we won Olivia with money, we'd have lost the only thing that made it worth winning. He turned back to the judge. "You want to know if she's a stable presence in my daughter's life? She rearranged her entire empire so she could be here when I deploy. She stepped back from running a company worth more than some nations so a 6-year-old wouldn't be alone when her daddy's at sea. That's not a scandal, Your Honor. In 14 years of service, I have met generals and senators and heroes, and I have never met anyone with more integrity than that woman sitting right there. My daughter is lucky to have her. We both are." He took a breath and his voice dropped, and the last thing he said quietly, almost to himself, but the whole silent room heard every word. "I don't want my daughter raised by money," Nathan said. "I never have. I want her raised by love. And I am standing here in this uniform to tell you that I have loved that little girl every single day of her life, through every deployment and every hard night and every lonely mile of ocean between us. And I am asking this court, please, please, do not take her from the one person who has never once, not for a single day, let her go." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. And behind him in the gallery, Victoria Ashford, who had faced down her board without a tremor, who had built an empire, who had learned as a girl to never let anyone see her cry, put both hands over her face and wept silently, helplessly, because in 32 years of walking through a world that only ever wanted what she had never once heard anyone stand up and fight for something, the way this man had just fought with no weapon, but the truth, and she understood fully and finally that she would love him for the rest of her life. Judge Warren took a recess. 20 minutes that felt like 20 years. Nathan sat on a bench in the hallway with his head in his hands, and Victoria sat beside him, close her shoulder against his, not saying anything because there was nothing to say. Ruth stood a little way off, watching the courtroom door. "I don't know if it was enough," Nathan said finally low. "It was the truth," Victoria said. "You said the truth. Whatever she decides, you said the truth, and there's nothing more you could have done." She found his hand. "And Nathan, whatever happens in there, what you said about me." Her voice wavered. "No one has ever defended me in my life. Not once. People have wanted me and used me and feared me. Nobody has ever stood up in a room and defended me. You just did it under oath in the most important hour of your life. I will never forget it. Not if I live to be 100. Nathan turned and looked at her. It wasn't a defense. It was just true. I know, Victoria whispered. That's what undoes me. You don't even know you're doing it. The door opened. The bailiff leaned out. Judge is ready, Tan. They filed back in. Nathan's legs felt like they belonged to someone else. He found Rebecca's face across the aisle, pale drawn, and for the first time uncertain. Judge Warren sat and folded her hands and looked out at the small broken family in front of her for a long moment before she spoke. In 22 years on this bench, Judge Warren began, I have heard a great many parents tell me how much they love their children. Love is easy to say. I have learned to listen instead for something else. I listen for evidence. I listen for the record. Because a child cannot eat love that is only spoken. A child is fed by love that shows up, that changes the diapers, and sits through the fevers, and learns to braid the hair, and calls from the other side of the world at 3 a.m. She removed her glasses. Ms. Vale, I want to speak to you directly, and I want you to hear that I am not unkind when I say this. I believe that some part of you does love your daughter. I believe your remorse in this moment may even be real. But love that vanishes for 5.5 years and returns the week its former partner appears in the newspaper, beside a fortune, is not the kind of love a court can build a child's life on. I have to weigh what has been proven, not what is promised. And what has been proven over 6 years with an overwhelming and frankly extraordinary record is that Olivia Cole has one parent who has never once let her go. Nathan stopped breathing. The petition for modification of custody is denied. Judge Warren said it plainly. Full physical and legal custody remains with the father, Lieutenant Nathan Cole. Ms. Vale, if you wish to build a genuine relationship with your daughter, this court will consider a schedule of supervised visitation contingent on your demonstrated and sustained commitment over time measured in years, not headlines. That door is not closed to you, but it must be walked through slowly, and it must be walked through for the right reasons, and this court will be watching to see which. She looked at Nathan then, and something in her weathered face softened past the judge and into the woman. Lieutenant Cole, in all my years I have rarely heard testimony like yours. You may step down and go home to your daughter, and for whatever it's worth from a stranger in a robe, thank you. For your service and for the kind of father you are. She's a lucky little girl. She picked up her gavel. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down, and the sound of it was the sound of Nathan Cole's whole world staying intact. He didn't move for a second. He couldn't. And then Victoria was there, and Ruth was there, and Ruth was saying something brisk and pleased that he couldn't hear over the roaring in his ears. And Victoria had both arms around him, and he realized his face was wet and he didn't care who saw. We won, Victoria was saying into his shoulder, laughing and crying at once. Nathan, Nathan, we won. She's yours. She's staying yours. I gotta call the school, Nathan said stupidly, his voice thick. I gotta Mrs. Alvarez has her. I gotta tell her I gotta go get my kid. Then let's go get your kid, Victoria said. Across the aisle, Rebecca gathered her things in silence. At the door she paused, and for one moment she looked back at Nathan, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but an ending. Nathan gave her a small nod. Whatever else she was the woman who'd given him Olivia, and he could not fully hate the source of the best thing in his life. Then she was gone, and the door swung shut, and it was over. They drove back together. Victoria drove. Nathan couldn't. He sat in the passenger seat of her car in his dress blues, and watched the road, and every few minutes he'd let out a long breath, like a man surfacing from deep water. I want to tell you something, Victoria said, eyes on the road. I made a decision. During the recess sitting in that hallway, I've been circling it for weeks, and today I finally landed. Yeah, I'm stepping down as CEO, day to day. She said it calmly, like she was commenting on the weather, but her hands tightened on the wheel. I'll stay on as chairwoman. I'll keep a hand on the big things, but the 18-hour days, the constant travel, the whole machine of it. I'm done. I've spent my whole life running that company to win a fight with a ghost, and today I sat in a courtroom and watched a man win the only fight that ever mattered with nothing but the truth, and I thought... Her voice caught. I thought I want a life, not a win. A life. You told me those were different things that first night on your porch. I finally understand what you meant. Nathan turned to look at her. Victoria, that company is your whole, you can't give that up for. I'm not giving it up for you, she said, and she glanced at him and she was smiling. That's the thing you still don't understand, and I love you for not understanding it. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for me. I'm doing it because for the first time in my life, I know what I actually want, and it isn't in a boardroom. It's in a small house with a leaky roof with a man who tells the truth, and a little girl who makes me do the voices. She reached over and found his hand without taking her eyes off the road. I've had all the money there is, Nathan. It bought me nothing that mattered. I'd trade the whole thing for the life you built in that little house. And the beautiful part, the part I can hardly believe I don't even have to trade it. I just have to put it down and walk toward you. So that's what I'm doing. Nathan couldn't speak. He lifted her hand and pressed it to his lips. There's one more thing, Victoria said. And you can say no. But I've been looking at houses. Not mansions, don't make that face. There's a place near the base, on the water. Nothing fancy, 4 bedrooms, a dock, a good school district. Close enough that Olivia doesn't have to change schools and you don't have to change your posting. Close enough that when you deploy, I'm right there. She took a breath. I want to buy it for us. For the 3 of us. I know it's fast. I know. But I've spent 32 years being careful. And it made me miserable. And I watched you spend 6 years being careful. And it made you miserable. And I'm done being careful. I want a home with you. Say yes. Nathan looked at this woman. This impossible, extraordinary woman who had crossed a ballroom to ask a lonely man to dance and never once looked back, and he thought about the wall he'd built so high, he'd forgotten there was a sky and how completely she'd torn it down. Yes, he said. God, yes. But Victoria, not too big. Olivia doesn't need a mansion. She needs a swing set and a dog and a room she can make a mess in. 4 bedrooms. Victoria promised, laughing. A swing set, and we'll get her the dog. We'll get her the biggest, dumbest, most loving dog in the shelter. She'll lose her mind. I'm counting on it. They pulled up in front of Mrs. Alvarez's house, and before the car had fully stopped, the front door burst open, and a small figure in a dinosaur shirt came flying down the walk, pigtails streaming, and Nathan was out of the car, and on his knees in the grass, and Olivia hit him like a cannonball, and he caught her, and held her, and buried his face in her hair. Did we win? Olivia was shouting. Mrs. Alvarez said I had to wait and wait. Did we win? Do I get to stay with you? You get to stay with me, Nathan said, his voice breaking completely now. No soldier left in it, just a father. Forever, Bug. You get to stay with me forever. Nobody's ever taking you anywhere. Olivia pulled back and looked at him with those enormous, serious eyes, and then she looked past him at Victoria, who was standing by the car with tears streaming down her face, not wanting to intrude on the moment, and Olivia wriggled out of her father's arms and marched straight over to her and threw her arms around Victoria's waist. You stay too, Olivia commanded, muffled against Victoria's dress. Daddy stays and I stay and you stay. Everybody stays. That's the rule now. Victoria dropped to her knees on the sidewalk and gathered the little girl up, and she couldn't speak. She just held her, this child who had knocked down a wall 32 years in the making with a baking soda volcano and a demand that she learn the voices. Everybody stays. Victoria finally managed. I promise. That's the rule now. Everybody stays. And Nathan knelt down and wrapped his arms around both of them, the 3 of them together on a cracked sidewalk in front of a neighbor's house on the day their whole lives had been decided. And Mrs. Alvarez watched from her porch and wiped her eyes with her apron, and for a long moment, nobody let go of anybody, because they didn't have to anymore. They'd stopped being careful. They'd stopped being safe. They'd become at last a family, the one thing none of them had believed they'd ever have held together, not by money or law or anything anyone could take away, but by the simplest and strongest thing. There is 3 people who had finally, against all the odds the world could throw, chosen each other and meant to keep choosing each other every single day for the rest of their lives. The house on the water turned out to be everything Nathan had made her promise it wouldn't be too much of, and nothing he'd feared it would be. They moved in on a Saturday in early autumn, and it took exactly one afternoon for it to stop feeling like Victoria's and start feeling like theirs. That was Olivia's doing. Within an hour of the moving truck pulling away, she had claimed the second bedroom, declared the dock mine and Daddy's for fishing, fallen in the shallow end of nothing at all and gotten soaked, and named the dog. Because they'd gotten the dog. Of course they'd gotten the dog. They'd gone to the shelter the week the papers were signed, and Olivia had walked past 40 adoptable, adorable, camera-ready puppies and stopped dead in front of a kennel holding the ugliest animal Nathan had ever seen. An enormous, graying, half-blind mutt of no discernible breed that the shelter guessed was around 9 years old and had been returned twice. "That one," Olivia had said. "Bug," Nathan started. "He's real old and he's—" "That one." Olivia had pressed her hand flat against the kennel. "Nobody wants him. Everybody keeps giving him back. That's mean." She'd looked up at Victoria with those enormous, serious eyes. "We don't give people back. That's the rule now. Everybody stays." And Victoria, who could have bought every purebred champion in the state, had knelt down next to a 6-year-old in front of a broken old dog and said, "You're right. That's the rule. We'll take him." They named him Admiral. He snored like a dying outboard motor walked into walls on his blind side, and loved the three of them with the desperate, grateful totality of a creature who had given up on ever having a home and gotten one anyway. Nathan understood the feeling completely. The months that followed were by any measure the old Victoria would have recognized catastrophically unproductive. She stepped down as CEO in a press release that sent the stock down 2%, and then, when the market saw who she'd chosen as her successor, back up 3%. She kept the chairwoman's seat, flew out for the board meetings that mattered, and spent the rest of her time learning things she'd never once had reason to learn. How to pack a school lunch. How to work the temperamental washing machine that came with the house. How to French braid, which Nathan taught her badly, the two of them hunched over a patient Olivia at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning while Admiral snored at their feet. "You've built weapons systems," Nathan said, watching her fingers fumble the third strand for the 5th time. "This is beyond you." "The weapon systems didn't squirm," Victoria muttered. "Hold still, Olivia." "I am holding still. You're both being slow." Victoria got it eventually. A crooked, lopsided braid that listed to one side like a ship taking water. She held it up in triumph. Olivia inspected it in the mirror with the grave attention of a quality inspector. "It's bad," Olivia pronounced. "But you tried hard. I'll wear it." Victoria laughed until she had to sit down, and Nathan looked at the two of them, his impossible billionaire on the kitchen floor, undone with laughter over a bad braid, and his daughter magnanimously agreeing to wear it, and thought that he had never in his life seen anything he wanted to protect more. But the thing about Nathan's life, the thing Victoria had signed on for with open eyes, was that it did not belong entirely to any of them. It belonged in part to the Navy, and the Navy called that winter. The orders came the way they always did, without ceremony. A routine notification that Lieutenant Cole would deploy in 3 weeks for a 6-month rotation. Nathan read the message twice, set down his phone, and felt the old familiar dread, the one he'd carried into every deployment of Olivia's life. The dread of leaving her. But underneath it this time was something new, and it took him a moment to name it. It was the strange, unfamiliar comfort of knowing that this time he wasn't leaving her with a note and a neighbor. This time he was leaving her with a family. He told Victoria that night after Olivia was asleep out on the dock with the water black and quiet below them. 6 months, he said. I ship out in 3 weeks. Victoria was quiet for a moment. He watched her, braced for he didn't know what. The old Victoria, the one from the magazine covers, might have had a dozen reactions. Might have offered to make a call. Might have flinched from the reality of what she'd chosen. Instead, she just reached over and took his hand. "Okay," she said. "Okay, what did you expect me to say?" She turned to look at him. "I knew what I was choosing, Nathan. I chose it anyway. I chose all of it, including this part. Especially this part. She squeezed his hand. You go do the thing you swore to do. You go stand between this country and the things that would hurt it. And Olivia and I will be right here. I'll do the lunches and the braids and the bedtime stories, and I'll do the voices. I've gotten better at the voices, you have to admit, and I will call you every single day the connection allows, and I will hold this whole life together with both hands until you walk back through that door. Her voice caught just slightly. And you will walk back through that door. You always come back. You told a whole courtroom that under oath. Don't make a liar out of yourself now. Nathan felt something break loose in his chest that he'd been carrying for 6 years. Every other deployment he'd left, knowing the person waiting was a paid neighbor kind, but not blood, not his. Every other deployment he'd lain awake in his rack 1,000 miles from home, doing the terrible math of a child growing up in flashes he wasn't there to see. I've never had somebody to come home to, he said, his voice rough. Not since Rebecca. I've had somebody to come home for. That's different. You know that's different. I know, Victoria said softly. I've had it backwards my whole life too. Plenty of people to come home for, shareholders, employees, the whole company depending on me. Nobody to come home to. Just an empty apartment and reports over the sink. She leaned her head against his shoulder. We're going to fix that for each other, you and me. You come home to me. I come home to you. That's the deal. That's the whole deal. Telling Olivia was harder. She'd known deployments her whole life, but she was 6 now, old enough to understand what 6 months meant, old enough to have started counting. She sat very still while Nathan explained it, her rabbit clutched tight, and when he finished, she didn't cry. She just looked at him with those enormous, serious eyes. 6 months is a really long time, she said. It is, Bug. It's the longest I've had to be away. I'm not going to lie to you about that. Will you call? Every day I can. Sometimes the ocean makes it hard, but every single day I can, I promise. Olivia thought about this. Then she turned and looked at Victoria, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, and Nathan watched his daughter do a thing that undid him completely. She reached over and put her small hand in Victoria's. Will you stay? Olivia asked her. Not Daddy. Victoria. When Daddy's on the ocean, will you stay the whole time? Victoria's throat worked. The whole time, she said. Every single day of it. I'm not going anywhere, Olivia. I promise you that on my life. Because sometimes people go away, Olivia said, and her voice wavered for the first time, and Nathan understood with a fresh stab of pain that his daughter had learned young that the people you love can vanish, that her mother had taught her that lesson before she could even form the memory. Sometimes people say they'll stay, and then they don't. The room was very still. Nathan couldn't speak. This was the wound at the center of his little girl, the one he'd spent 6 years trying to heal with the only medicine he had, which was to never once leave her himself. Victoria slid down off the bed and knelt on the floor so she was eye level with the child, the way she had that very first night in the small house with the leaky roof. Olivia, she said, look at me. I need you to hear this, and I need you to remember it, and anytime you feel scared while your daddy's away, I want you to pull it out and look at it like a photograph. Okay? Olivia nodded, solemn. I know that people have gone away from you before, and I know that made a hurt inside you that's real, and I'm not going to tell you it isn't there. But I want to tell you something about me. Victoria took a breath. My whole life, everybody who ever came close to me wanted something. Money or help or a piece of what I had. Nobody ever wanted just me. And then I met your daddy, and then I met you, and you're the first 2 people in my whole entire life who wanted me for me. Not for anything I have. Just me. Her voice was breaking now, but she held Olivia's eyes. Do you understand what that means? It means you are the most precious thing that has ever happened to me. It means I would sooner cut off my own arm than leave you. It means that when your daddy's out on that ocean, You are going to be so completely, absolutely not alone that you'll get sick of me. I'll be there in the morning, and I'll be there at night, and I'll be there every single second in between. I am never, ever going away from you, Olivia Grace Cole. Never. That's not a maybe. That's not a we'll see. That's a forever. Olivia looked at her for a long, long moment, weighing it with the terrible seriousness of a child who has been let down before and needs to know if it's safe to believe again. Pinky promise, she said finally. Victoria held up her little finger, and it trembled. Pinky promise. The most serious kind there is. Olivia hooked her pinky around Victoria's, and something in her small face settled some fear that had lived there her whole life, finally letting go its grip, and she leaned forward and put her arms around Victoria's neck, and over the child's shoulder, Victoria looked at Nathan with tears running freely down her face, and Nathan, standing in the doorway of his daughter's room, understood that whatever he'd given up his safe, careful life for, it had been worth every ounce of the risk 100 times over. Cassette. He deployed on a gray morning 3 weeks later. Victoria drove him to the base with Olivia in the back seat, unusually quiet, and they stood together at the edge of the pier while sailors filed aboard, and families said the wordless, wrenching goodbyes that Nathan had watched 100 times, and finally this time was part of in the fullest way. He knelt down in front of Olivia in his uniform. You know the rules, he said. Be good for Victoria, Olivia recited. Do my homework. Feed Admiral, even though he's gross about it. And, her lip trembled. And you come back. And I come back. Nathan pulled her into his arms and held her hard enough to memorize the way he always did, the way he'd learned to do, so that if the worst happened, he'd have something to hold on to in whatever came after. I love you more than the whole ocean bug, all of it, every drop. I love you more than the ocean and the sky and space, Olivia said fiercely into his neck, upping the ante, the way she always did. You win, Nathan whispered. You always win. Then he stood, and he turned to Victoria, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. There was too much, and not enough time. Come home, Victoria said finally. It was all she could manage. I always do. He touched her face. Hold the line for me, both of you. With both hands, Victoria said. Now go before I do something undignified in front of the entire United States Navy. Nathan kissed her once, and then he shouldered his bag and walked up the gangway, and at the top, he turned and gave them a small salute, the same nod he'd given her across a ballroom a lifetime ago. And then the ship swallowed him, and he was gone. Victoria stood on this pier holding a 6-year-old's hand, watching the gray ship pull slowly away from the dock, and she understood at last in her bones the thing that every military family has always known. That love isn't only the dancing and the volcanoes and the good mornings. That sometimes love is standing on a pier watching the most important person in your world disappear over the horizon and choosing to hold the line anyway, and being there when they come back. She had spent 32 years believing love was something you won. Nathan had taught her it was something you did every single day, especially the hard ones. He'll come back, Olivia said, squeezing her hand. It wasn't a question anymore. Somewhere in the last 3 weeks, it had stopped being a question. He'll come back, Victoria agreed. And we'll be right here. Come on. Let's go home and make Admiral's dinner, even though he's gross about it. Olivia almost smiled. He is gross about it. He's the grossest, Victoria said, and we love him anyway. That's the rule. That's the rule, Olivia agreed, and the two of them walked back to the car hand in hand, and behind them a Navy ship carried a good man out to sea, and for the first time in his life he sailed knowing exactly what he was sailing home to. The 6 months were long. Victoria had known they would be, but knowing and living are different things. There were hard nights of fever at 2 a.m. when Nathan couldn't be reached, and Victoria sat up until dawn with a cool cloth and a scared little girl feeling more useful and more terrified than any billion-dollar deal had ever made her feel. There was a school play Nathan missed, and Victoria filmed the whole thing on her phone with shaking hands so he could watch it later, and cried in the dark auditorium when Olivia found her face in the crowd and waved. There were the daily calls precious and too short. Nathan's voice thin across 10,000 miles, and the days there were no calls at all. And Victoria learned the particular ache of loving someone whose safety she could not control with all the money and power on earth. But she held the line. She did the lunches and the braids. Her braids got good, eventually better than Nathan's ever were, a fact she planned to lord over him for years. She did the bedtime stories and the voices. She learned Olivia's teachers' names and her friends' names, and which foods were currently acceptable and which had been mysteriously banned. She became, without quite noticing the moment it happened, the thing she'd promised to be on that witness stand. Not a scandal, not a stepmother-to-be. A mother in every way that the word actually means, which is to say, the way Nathan had defined it in a courtroom, the one who shows up. And Nathan came home. Of course Nathan came home. He always came back. He came back on a bright, cold morning in spring, and Victoria and Olivia stood on the same pier where they'd said goodbye. And when Olivia spotted him coming down the gangway, she took off running and hit him like a cannonball, and Nathan caught his daughter and swung her up and buried his face in her hair, and over her shoulder he found Victoria's eyes, and the look on his face, the pure disbelieving relief of a man coming home to a life he'd stopped believing he'd ever have, was a thing Victoria would carry in her heart for the rest of her days. "You came back," Olivia was shouting. "You always come back. I always come back," Nathan said, and set her down and crossed the last few feet to Victoria and pulled her into his arms. And the three of them stood on the pier holding on to each other, while the whole world moved around them, and Nathan thought that he had sailed home to a great many ports in 14 years of service, and none of them had ever felt like this. Like an arrival. Like a homecoming that was actually a home. Chatai. A year to the day after the wedding, where it all began, Nathan received recognition for his service during a dangerous overseas operation. The details classified the meaning clear enough in the faces of the men whose lives he'd had a hand in bringing home. There was a banquet. A formal thing, dress uniforms and long tables, and speeches held in a hall not so different from the ballroom where a lonely billionaire had once crossed a room to ask a lonely sailor to dance. And by some grace, some coincidence that Victoria would later swear she'd had nothing to do with, and Nathan would never quite believe her about the orchestra hired for the evening, was the same one that had played at Ryan Foster's wedding. Nathan was standing near the edge of the room in his dress whites when they began to play. Ryan was there, and Ryan's wife and Reyes promoted now, and grayer, and a hall full of sailors and their families. Olivia was there too, 7 years old now, and losing teeth on a schedule, wearing a dress she'd picked herself and had opinions about. And the orchestra shifted into a slow song that Nathan knew that he would know anywhere that had been playing the first time a woman changed the entire course of his life with 4 simple words. He turned and Victoria was walking toward him. She was wearing a navy blue gown, elegant and simple, and she was smiling the exact smile she'd smiled that first night, the one that had cut through a room full of important people and found the one man not looking at her. And Nathan felt the whole year fold up like a map until he was standing in 2 ballrooms at once a lifetime ago. And right now watching the same woman cross the same floor to the same song. She stopped in front of him, and without a word, exactly as she had the first time she extended her hand. Nathan took it. They danced. And this time, there was no 6 inches of careful daylight between them. This time, she came into his arms like she belonged there, because she did. And Olivia stood at the edge of the floor with Mrs. Alvarez, and clapped, and Ryan watched with his arm around his wife, and shook his head in wonder. And the whole hall of sailors and families watched a decorated Navy officer dance with the woman everyone now knew had walked away from an empire to pack his daughter's lunches. "You remember this song?" Victoria said. "I've never forgotten a second of that night," Nathan said. "Not 1 second. I told myself for weeks it didn't happen, that a woman like you couldn't have really crossed a room for a man like me." "A woman like me," Victoria repeated and smiled. "You still don't understand what you did that night. You looked at me like I was a person. Do you have any idea how long I'd waited for that? My whole life, Nathan. My whole entire life. And it came from a tired man in a rented tux who just wanted to go home to his little girl. They turned slowly and the song wound toward its close, and Victoria leaned in against his shoulder, the way she had the very first night, and this time Nathan wasn't afraid, and this time neither of them was leaving. I've carried something in my heart since that first dance, Victoria said softly near his ear. I never told you. I was afraid to, and I don't want to carry it anymore. Tell me, Nathan murmured. That night I told you I asked you to dance because you were different, because you were the only man in the room not looking at my money. Her voice trembled. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth is... She pulled back just enough to look at him, and her eyes were shining. I didn't ask you to dance because you were different, Nathan. I asked you because somehow, before you'd even said a word to me, I knew. I looked across that room at a man I'd never met, and something in me just knew the way you know your own name, that you were the man I'd been waiting for my whole life. I didn't have a single reason to believe it. I just knew. And I was right. God, I was so right. Nathan stopped dancing. He stopped right there in the middle of the floor, exactly the way he had the first night. And this time it wasn't shock that stopped him. It was certainty. He looked at this woman, this impossible, extraordinary, unguarded woman, who had crossed a room and torn down a wall and packed 1,000 school lunches and held the line through 6 months of ocean. And he knew the way she'd known with no reason and every reason that there was only one thing left to do. He reached into his pocket, and Nathan Cole, in front of Ryan and Reyes, and a hall full of sailors, and his own wide-eyed daughter in his dress-white uniform under the same song from the same orchestra, got down on one knee. The whole room went silent. The orchestra faltered, and then, understanding played on softer. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. I'm not going to give a speech, Nathan said, his voice thick, looking up at her. You know I'm no good at speeches. I did my talking in a courtroom a year ago, and I used up my whole life's supply of words. So I'll just say the true thing, the way you taught me. I spent 6 years believing love had left my life for good. I built a wall so high I forgot there was a sky. And then you crossed a room and asked me to dance. And you didn't just tear down the wall. Victoria, you gave me back the whole sky. You and me and that little girl over there who's about to cry. Olivia was in fact already crying and laughing and gripping Mrs. Alvarez's hand hard enough to hurt. We're already a family. We have been for a year. But I want to make it the kind nobody can ever question again. I want to come home to you for the rest of my life. So, he held up the ring. His hand was steady. It had never been steadier. Victoria Ashford, will you? Yes, Victoria said. I'm not even done. I don't care. Yes. 1,000 times yes. She was already pulling him up, already reaching for him, laughing and crying at once. I said yes before you finished the first time we danced, Nathan Cole. I just didn't say it out loud. Yes, yes. And then Olivia was there, breaking free of Mrs. Alvarez and running across the floor and crashing into both of them. And Nathan scooped her up with one arm and held Victoria with the other, and the ring went on Victoria's finger with both of them, and a 7-year-old trying to help. And the whole hall of sailors and families erupted applause and cheers, and Ryan Foster whooping like a man at a football game, and Reyes clapping with tears in his hard old eyes, and the orchestra swelling back into the song, into their song, the one that had started everything. Everybody stays! Olivia was shouting over and over to anyone who would listen to the whole cheering room. That's the rule. Everybody stays forever. Everybody stays forever, Nathan agreed, holding the two of them, his whole entire world gathered up in his 2 arms in the middle of a dance floor. That's the rule, Bug. That's the rule for good now. Later, much later, after the cheering had faded and the guests had gone and Olivia had fallen asleep in a chair with cake on her face, and Admiral would be waiting gross and delighted at home, Nathan and Victoria stood alone on the empty dance floor. The orchestra had packed up. There was no music now. But they swayed together anyway, Slow in the quiet, a man and a woman who had found each other against every impossible odd the world could stack against them. "Do you ever think about it?" Victoria asked quietly, her head on his shoulder. "How close we came to never happening if you'd left the wedding early like you planned. If I'd gone to talk to the senator instead. One dance. Our whole lives came down to one dance." "I think about it every day," Nathan said, "and then I stop thinking about it because it makes me too grateful to stand up." He pressed his lips to her hair. "But I don't think it was luck. I think two people spent a long time being lonely and building walls and telling themselves love wasn't for them. And then we got one chance to be brave instead of safe. That's all it ever is. One chance to reach out instead of pull back. Most people don't take it. We did." "We did," Victoria echoed. "You crossed the room," Nathan said. "That's the bravest thing I ever saw anybody do, and I've served with heroes. You crossed the room." Victoria lifted her head and looked at him, at this steady, honest man who had faced down a billionaire and a board and a courtroom and 6 months of ocean with nothing but the truth. And she thought about the girl she'd been lonely on the cover of magazines. Certain love was a thing that happened to other people. She thought about the empty apartment and the reports over the sink. She thought about the wall she'd built so high she'd forgotten there was a sky. And she thought about now. About the crooked braids and the gross old dog, and the little girl asleep with cake on her face about the small house on the water, and the pier where she'd learned what love actually was, about the man holding her in the middle of an empty dance floor, with a ring on her finger and forever in his eyes. She had built one of the largest companies in America. She had testified before Congress. She had negotiated with governments and moved billions with a nod. And none of it, not $1 of it, not 1 ounce of that power had ever come close to this. To being seen, to being chosen, to being finally, after 32 years of loneliness, home. "You want to know the best thing that happened to me this week?" Victoria asked softly. Nathan smiled. He remembered the question. He remembered a dance floor a lifetime ago and a woman who hadn't had an answer. "Tell me," he said. "This," Victoria said simply. "All of it. This is the best thing that happened to me this week, and last week, and every week for the rest of my life." She laid her head back on his shoulder. "I finally have an answer to your question, Nathan. It took me a year, but I have one. The best thing that ever happened to me is the three of us. That's it. That's the whole answer. That's everything." And in the quiet of an empty hall, with no music, but the memory of it, and no witness, but the stars through the high windows, a Navy officer and the woman who'd crossed a room to find him held each other and swayed two lonely souls who had stopped being lonely. Two careful people who had finally stopped being careful. Two hearts that had found in each other the one thing that all the money and power and success in the world could never buy and never take away. They had chosen each other. Against every odd past, every wall, through every storm the world could send, they had chosen each other, and they would go on choosing each other every single ordinary day for the rest of their lives. Because in the end, that is the only thing love has ever been. Not wealth, not status, not power. Just two people who finally see each other for exactly who they are and choose and keep choosing to stay. Everybody stays. That was the rule now, and it always would be.